thinking that I won't react. You whispering my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that I'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, pulling the sound of my name in the crowd. You did a bust. Oh, 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 oh. You did a bust. Oh, 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 oh. Just 'cause I took a break, you're making a huge mistake, thinking you can take the throne. Look at you trembling, step into the lion's den. Bet you wish you stayed at home. Begging for mercy underneath your breath when I ain't even sweating yet. My legend's written in the stone, yeah. You're crying age, you're in
Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to It's in Time, not on time, as I've reminded more than a few people already today. Is Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Checking out, got to drive through some absolutely gorgeous scenery because it was 21 degrees and it was foggy. And I would drive going over some of the eastern mountains in Oregon. And we'd come up on a little top and the fog would clear out a bit and the sun would come down. Well, what happens when it's very foggy, there's a lot of moisture in the air and the temperature is below freezing, you get something called hoarfrost. That's H-O-A-R, frost.
Okay, that makes a little more sense.
Yeah, and it turns everything white. I mean, there was about an inch deep hoarfrost covering everything, and all of the trees just were crystal white against a deep blue backdrop of the sky as I was coming over the tops of some of the passes. You know, there's snow on the ground, so all the snow's white. It was really beautiful, and I really wish there had been places for me to pull over to take pictures because it was gorgeous.
All right, now what I'm going to do here real quick is... All right, I just, yeah, of course, there's always something, right? So I don't actually have access to the stream right now, and I'm not even sure. I had promised Titan that we were under control here, but it looks like we may not be. And so let me, or not. Last I saw, the stream was all connected, and we were all good. And it only looks like that to me from one side here, but not from. Well, I'm going to assume that we're doing okay. That's basically never a safe assumption, but I'm going to try. I'm going to go with it anyway. So, yeah.
You know what they say about making assumptions?
Mother of all fuck-ups or something? Like, I don't know. I don't know. I was asleep during that part of class.
It makes an ass out of me and you.
Oh. Yeah, well, for you, that's not quite as far a journey, but okay. All right, so what happened? Well, you know, this is maybe slightly over-engineered. I've actually got 4 monitors here and several different computers. And one reason is it's a little easier to broadcast the show on its own dedicated computer. I used to just use my work computer. It's got its own computer now because that way if I install whatever on my computer, it doesn't fuck with the show, and I don't have to check the show every time Windows does an update. This computer's isolated. Windows can't update on it, can't do anything. Keep Microsoft off of In Time. And in order to do this, I have a KVM switch and one of the channels blue, and my monitor here is gone. I got nothing. So I still got the other monitors, but the biggie is gone, and that's the main one. It's all the real estate I need and use, and sort of jury-rigged to at least get keyboard, mouse, and all that other shit connected. And of course, in the process of doing that, I forgot to connect the software to the show, which needs to be done at the start of every episode. So, yeah, we're connected, I think, and it looks like
Yes,
we
are. I am
yeah,
watching our show as we speak.
Yeah. How do I lag? Well, yeah, that's one of the other things too. Is I forget to turn off. I should probably turn off one of the other ones. But first of all, wife is working from home most of the time now, so she kills lag on the or she causes some lag on the show. I just, you know.
Well, if we are lagging, it's only by seconds. So
in time is a public service. Okay, she's got a PhD, which is a little intimidating anyway, right? And then she's actually like literally working. She works at the Broad Institute, so she's literally working on COVID and shit like that. But I honestly think a YouTube news channel is more important. So now somebody, I don't know who, they have to have some technical skill, went into the router and prioritized all of the ports that vMix, our software, uses to connect to YouTube. I don't know what kind of bastard would do that. I think science is important, and I can't believe anyone will undermine her work, but that's the commitment that somebody around here has to the show. I'm blaming one of the kids, probably the youngest. She's the sneaky one. At any rate, yeah, so that, and if it lags, one of the backups going on one of the machines. It's yeah, gainful employment is a dirty word, or two of them. You get the point. Anyways, and I'm on. I'm tired, got a headache, but I'm on a little bit of a rebound high. I was so sick for so long that now I'm like, I'm alive, and so are you. And I spent 3 days straight working on a video. You can still see the settings, but we are getting some significant lag. My suspicion is I'm going to shut down my working computer in case that's trying to upload anything to the internet. That'll often do it, or my wife is uploading baby photos or so. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, it's like, but at any rate, I'm going to shut down that other computer. Yeah, okay. Lips are sealed, and she doesn't watch. At any rate, where was I?
If I let a squirrel go right now, and let it run by, will you get distracted by that too?
What? Sorry.
You remind me of the dog that's like you're reminding me of the dog that's like interested in everything, and then suddenly a squirrel runs through the yard, and it's like, oh, squirrel, and totally loses track of what they're doing.
I'm going to be that way until I decompress from trying to get everything going at the last minute. At any rate, 3 days, maybe 3 hours of sleep each day, trying to get that. Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., as everyone knows, is important to me. I got that picture back there. And I wanted to do a very good program on him for the birthday, and we've been meaning to do that every year. We only covered it 1 year, and we did a decent job, but we can do better. So, but I was sick, and I only had about 3 days to do it. Spent, most of every day for it. Family infinitely patient with that, but I wasn't able to get it done quality. So we'll have it, but it'll be next month. All right. So all that aside. What's going on with you?
Same stuff, different loads, different parts of the country.
I did an interview, and I included a link to the show. The interview is not going to be up for probably about 2 weeks because he's 2 weeks behind. But it's with Fabio, which some people in our community knows. He's not the Greek god, Fabio that's on all the covers, and probably he's 100 years old by now. But it's he's in one of the communities that I'm very loosely not even associated with, actually, but at any rate that I've drifted or wandered through or had contact with on 1 or 2 occasions. Anyways, he's been doing a series of interviews. I think it's an interview that nobody cares about. Yeah, the interview that nobody cares about. Tonic, T-O. Anyways. So I did it today. It was a lot of fun. I included a link to his channel down at the bottom, so I'm hoping people will check that out, and I'll put a link in or let people know when that comes up. I was wondering what kind of interview it was going to be. I'd seen some of his stuff, and he's taking it very seriously and wanted to do a good job. So I was just like, okay, we'll see. And I show up, and one of the first questions out of the gate, so do you think the middle class is dying, and do you think the death of the middle class is now and or in the future going to be ultimately responsible for the collapse of civilization in Europe and the United States? And I was like, that's the kind of interview. It's going to be my kind of interview. So right out of the gate, it was a lot of fun.
That's my kind of interview.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, what?
Man, I said, that's my kind of interview, man.
That's my kind of...
I'd go off on questions like that.
I know. I wish I could. Actually, to tell you the truth, I will bet you he would. I would bet you he'd be thrilled to interview you. It's an interesting concept. It's a short show, only about a half hour, 45 minutes. He asks his questions, and I think for people interested in more serious topics, he does the more serious questions. And for people who aren't, he does the more laid back ones. So I think he seems pretty fluid about it. But the last 3 questions you pick, and he'll ask you whatever you want to be asked, but you've only got 10 minutes. And obviously, for me, that was a challenge. But it was a good interview, and remind me, I have no doubt he'd be willing to. He's been interviewing a lot of people now. It looks like it's going to be a good show. So I really enjoyed that. I ended up talking about all of these policies in the U.S. that have been causing problems. And it was like, what do you think other countries think of the United States? I was like, I have a pretty good fucking idea what other countries think of the United States. And I told him, I was like, yeah, that's about right. And I was like, well, how did they used to think any differently? I said, yeah, I think, there was, there's always gripes, as well there should be. But, I think we had a lot more standing. And when we acted as the police of the world, for the most part, people really fucking shit on us for it. But they appreciated it so long as we, and this is what we talked with a bit with Commander McMillan last time, was he was like, when we showed up in Kuwait, they really did have flowers the first time around. But a lot changed. We ended up talking about Trumpism and economics and all sorts of interesting things. But what's really funny was it got me thinking about the Trump rant that I did, which I assume 1 or 2 people in the audience have probably heard. I know you've heard. And I was like, oh, wow. We touched on a lot of topics that I covered then. That was 7, 8 years ago. So, yeah, so if it turns out we're bored and want to, we can play that, because I started listening to some of that. I was like, oh, dear Lord, that was more prophetic than I had intended it to be. But anyways, that was my day. So,
well, I mean, there is a reason that the first episode and the opening of the newsroom, even though I take issue with some of those statistics that he rattles off, because those statistics come from the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization does not verify most of those statistics. They're self-reported for countries. If you and their criteria for what the criteria used varies wildly. That's why Cuba ranks higher than the United States in infant mortality, because we count all infants that die without them wanting to. Whereas Cuba, they have to be alive for like 2 weeks before they're considered an infant. So, there's a big,
and it's a
so I take a lot
show.
of issue with some of those.
It's not going to be completely accurate,
but I mean, yeah. I still love that opening. And it resonates very deeply, because there's the point, even though some of the details aren't accurate, the point still stands. And that's one of the reasons why I liked that opening so much. And the fact that it seems like people are, at least when that came out, people were kind of afraid to stand up and say, look, I don't think the United States is the greatest country on earth anymore. It certainly used to be. It built the most powerful country the world had ever seen, both militarily, economically. It was the largest creditor nation the world had ever seen, ever. And I think that the prestige and the United States just generally has slipped quite a lot. I think it's decided to rest back on a lot of its laurels and has let itself go. I mean, we're now in kind of dad bod mode of the United States instead of the young, hot guy that everybody wants to see on the screen.
Well, now this is welcome. This is In Time After Dark, and we're going to be talking about the hot body of the United States of America. There's a...
Yeah, don't ask me where some of my damn similes come from, because they just come out of nowhere.
I had no intention. We were don't audience, please. We were safe from me asking him that question.
So yeah, that's I like. There's a lot of issues, and the United States is on an unsustainable path currently. What it's doing is unsustainable. That which cannot be sustained will not be sustained. So we either need to make some significant changes, or the United States will collapse. There's a wide variety of collapses out there. You can see so many. Venezuela's collapsed. I don't think the United States would look like Venezuela, really, because there's a lot of other issues. Zimbabwe collapsed, Brazil collapsed. Hell, even the UK collapsed, had a monetary collapse. So there's a lot of different routes that we can go, but we need to change a bunch of shit, or we're going to be next.
Well, and it's a little. At this point, this was one of the things I'd said to Fabio. I think it's going to be unavoidable in one way or another, whether we end up having serious issues, especially from long-haul COVID or any other of the COVID issues, or from economic issues. The reality is we printing our way out of this problem isn't going to work. And we had our audience will remember 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐽, a co-host who was a delightful woman to have on, very knowledgeable, especially about the Supreme Court, and just, oh my God, eerie at how well she could predict. She predicted, she's like, oh, Roberts will dissent, but everyone else. And I was like, no way, and poof. But she was a modern monetary theorist, and that's an interesting theory, and it kind of changes a lot of things on its head, which are theories that always tend to attract me anyway. But, and at first being somewhat enamored of it myself, looking into it more, it's just like, this seems more like smoke and mirrors, and I'm not convinced, and the data I've seen says that the economy just does not work this way. But as part of that theory, essentially debt is irrelevant. Which is a shocking concept, and they make actually a reasonably decent argument for it, but I don't think the argument holds water in the end. But what scares me is I've been trying to figure out why this theory has been so many people are going for this now, and it's in the water supply, and I couldn't figure it out. The first thing was, well, because it was actually in some ways a much simpler theory. But then I realized I think they like it for the same reason religion is popular, is because it tells you what you want to hear. You're just going to be an afterlife, and you're going to be in heaven, and you're going to be able to print as much money as you want to print. And, the idea that you can print money as much to buy yourself out of debt without having to worry about inflation or this or that, and that inflation is really just a big boogeyman that doesn't really exist. That's I would love that to be true. And again, they make a decent shot at that argument, but I've had a discussion with several, PhD level monetary theorists, and none of them have been able to even answer the questions. They usually dodge them, at least from what I can tell. So, that theory is gaining water. I assume you know at least something about it.
Yeah, I've heard enough about it to go, I think I want to stay far, far away from that. It's like, because a lot of the points they make are like, yeah, you're right, until you're not. Like, that doesn't really matter. Well, you're kind of right until you're not. It ultimately, it does matter. There will come a time where it's like, if you're, I don't think, 23, 25 trillion, what our debt is now. Those are numbers that realistically can never be repaid. That is just insane. And we're not the only country running deficits like that, or have debt like that. China, amazingly enough, has an enormous amount of debt as well. And it's like you can chug along for an amazingly long amount of time, but you can't keep going forever. It's like the fundamental concepts of economics are true, and they apply in the real world. And you can ignore the real world for only so long before it will stand up and bitch slap you. And that's what will eventually happen. Now, there's so many different ways that can play out too. That and because of the fact that the economies of the world have kind of gotten intertwined, it is amazing the kinds of things that can go wrong, and you don't even know. I mean, it's just so horribly complicated that trying to make predictions is very difficult. But you can say, okay, look, fundamentally these things don't work. They have never worked. They've been tried and tried and tried several times, and they failed every single time. But they did work for a while, and for a lot of the people, that's good enough.
Well, I think, and that's where we're very short-term thinkers as a species. To answer Porpoise, yes, I am saying I talk to PhDs. I could go any number of directions with that. I know all the best PhDs. I talk to all the best PhDs, but I did teach high school for a long period of time, and that counts as a PhD. So I'm just saying. At any rate, is this a call-in show? That's a good question too. I would love to have you. I hadn't. Like I said, we had a serious technical issue, and we're still down a monitor, which makes it very difficult to connect. But if somebody wants to call in, if you'd like to call in, Porpoise, let me know, and I will get you in. And joining us today also is 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐷, and he's already been mentioned a couple times, and he was mentioned for. He's going to get a big head because he was mentioned in that interview that I was talking about earlier. Don't worry, it wasn't anything flattering or positive, but we did discuss Mr. 𝐓𝐬𝐷 once or twice in that interview. Again, the link to that channel is in the description, and when the show comes out, we'll let you all know. I think one of the things is liberals have a tendency to say, let me rephrase that. So there's this thinking that deficit spending is bad, and it's not. It's actually necessary. When you start a business, you have to start on some form of credit, usually. That's the basic principle. You have to get money from somewhere unless you're already wealthy, in which case you don't have to start a business. But so you do need to engage in some form of deficit spending. That's perfectly fine, and you end up, presumably, if you have a good idea, leveraging that money into something that earns you more money. You have to invest in a truck, in this or that, or whatever it is that you're doing to move forward. But that's supposed to be very limited, and if you're not capable of paying it back in your current business model, you have to find another way to do it. And the U.S. just keeps kicking that can down the road. And we've seen countries do this before, and they always fail at some point. And this reminds me of Bernie Madoff, who really just kept saying, well, let's just keep doing this same model of adding people to the top of the pyramid to pay for the bottom. People to the bottom to pay for the top. And we'll just keep doing that until I come up with some solution. I'm sure I will. And that's wish thinking. Nobody ever has. It doesn't happen. And it really looks to me like that's where we are. And that's really kind of scary.
Well, you also have to realize there can be some definite hurts to deficit spending. Going into debt to buy something today that's going to give you a valuable return, especially if debt is really cheap. I mean, it can make a lot of economic sense to go into debt. It really can. There is a moral hazard, however, when governments do this. Now, there are some instances where governments should be allowed, in my opinion, governments should be allowed to go into debt. When you're talking about, direct protection of the country or a signatory ally, defending their homeland, defending our homeland. There's, in declared wars, also perhaps natural disasters or pandemics. There are certainly instances where you don't want the government necessarily to be constrained, by a no deficit law, say. There's like several of the provinces and some of the states and municipalities have a lot of these regulations where they cannot deficit spend. You need to be able to allow your government to do that, which is why the founders allowed the government to deficit spend in the first place, because they recognize that it can be very valuable. But there's an inherent moral hazard to it, and that is when the government is borrowing money to put into programs, the citizens do not bear the costs of those programs. So who wouldn't be in favor of expanding or adding a new program when they're not actually physically paying for that program. And it creates a moral hazard. You'll never get rid of it because now it's become so popular, even though the people aren't paying for it. The government's going more and more into debt to sustain it. It creates a moral hazard. You need the population to bear the costs of what its governments are doing, or you run into this hazard. And it's an insidious trap that's almost impossible to get out of. It's like everybody agrees that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. That it's not well done. It's not solvent. It's got significant problems. Nobody ever really seems to want to actually fix it because it's kind of political suicide. It's like, because the truth of the matter is we either need to drastically raise taxes specifically to pay for this, or you need to just not get your benefits. How does that further your political career? It doesn't. So that it's a moral hazard that we have fallen into, where the government is doing a lot of things, and the citizens are not paying for those things. They're deficit spending every year. We're going up by about $1 trillion in debt a year now. That's $1 trillion worth of things that the people aren't paying for. So of course people are going to be in favor of those things. I guarantee that if you actually raised taxation to the level that it would be required, and just about everybody at that point would need to pay at least some tax, even if it's, you can't get back your FICA taxes, which you're technically not supposed to anyway, but with the way that the deductions can work, you can end up effectively getting that money back. At some point, almost everybody is going to need to pay taxes to be able to pay not only for everything that the government's actually spending money on every year, but it has to go even higher than that because we have a debt that needs to be repaid. So once people start paying that kind of level of taxation, they're going to start reevaluating what kinds of things. They're going to look at it and say, look, I'm paying all of this in tax, and what am I actually getting in return for this? And I think that you'll see a lot of people's minds change about what kinds of policies, what kinds of programs the government is doing, that the people aren't going to be so keen on the government doing anymore because it's just too expensive.
That's actually a really good point, and I hadn't thought of that, and I've heard you mention that before. I'm really glad that you brought it up, which is that okay, so moral hazard, and I'm sure probably most people know, but I'm going to quickly just reiterate. Moral hazard is that when you are divorced from the consequences, because you're using moral hazard in the formal sense, which is that's actually from insurance is where the term comes from, but and has been adopted by economics. The concept that if you are divorced from the consequences of your actions, you tend to act more immorally. And the example that actually was originally used was cars. People who insure their cars lock them less. If your car's insured, you are less likely to lock your car. Now, people hear this and sometimes sit there and say, "Oh, that's not true. I always lock my car. I would lock my car whether it was insured or not." Well, if you're in a really fancy neighborhood, you're in a nice neighborhood, and you realize you're just going to run into a store real quick and come out. You've got your keys with you. Your car is going to be perfectly safe. There are a million things factor into whether or not you're going to take the time to quickly lock your car and then unlock it when you maybe have a handful of groceries or whatever coming back out or not. And the quality of the neighborhood, how long you're going to be gone, so on and so forth. And one thing that affects it is whether or not you're insured. And if you're insured, you are less likely to lock your car. And people, given all other factors being equal, if your car is insured, the Overton window on that moves down a bit, and people lock their cars somewhat less because they don't have to pay as much of a consequence if their car gets broken into. So I think you bring up an interesting point. So the moral hazard here being that because we get all these awesome social programs, we get to feel good about helping people, and we know that we're making the world a better place. But we don't actually have to pay the consequences of doing it, and there is a consequence of doing it, and the bill will be, as what is it, the movie, oh my God, the wizard movie, Doctor Strange, the bill comes due. We're going to have to pay it at some point, and here's this huge debt. And I think that's an interesting point, which is we keep adding all of these programs, and I know I have that instinct too, where if I hear that there's a really expensive program, but it's going to have some benefit to somebody somewhere, I'm like, hey, let's do it. And it's like, okay, but I say that as if I don't actually have to pick and choose, as if I'm not on a budget, because I'm really not. That's what the that's what the debt is for, right? That's where we are. But we really are on a budget. So I think that's an interesting. If everybody had to pay, if we could not deficit spend anymore for, say, 10, 15 years, and let's just ignore the fact that there's a debt right now that has to be paid down, but we just sort of start from zero, but we have to pay for everything each and every year, and every single program directly affected how much tax I was paying each month. How much do you think that would affect people's, calculations as they're thinking what social programs are worth it and which ones aren't?
Well, yeah, and it causes a cascading effect too, because we already, you can see it by the numbers of people moving into and out of states such as California and New York. They've actually have net people moving out of the states, those two states specifically. Recently, I think the 2020 census showed that they actually lost population. When because a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people talk about, well, we need to tax the rich more. They need to pay their fair share. And it's like, well, the top 40% of taxes are paid by like the top 1% of our income earners in the United States already. And if you decide that, okay, well, we can't deficit spend anymore, and we have to raise the money for all of this stuff, so we're going to do things like institute a wealth tax, which I think has enormous potential problems with it. Just with the idea of doing that, the principles behind it. But there's also a very real consequence of doing things like that. You're going to see wealthy people leave the country. They're going to move their resources from the tax jurisdiction of the United States. And that will happen. It may not be not everybody may not move. Some of them may just, bear it and find ways to keep going on. But you're going to eventually see tax creep down. When the income tax was originally introduced, it was a wealth tax. It was only supposed to be charged to the wealthy people in the United States. It has slowly crept down to where everybody now pays an income tax. And if you fall below a certain threshold and you have certain numbers of deductions, you can get pretty much all of that back. But it still applies to everybody. Even if you fall below all of that, you still kind of have to file taxes, to let them know. And as soon as you earn more than that, you absolutely will be hit with the taxes that you have to pay. So there is a tax creep down. And when the wealthiest people in the world start leaving and you start losing that tax, more and more of that tax is going to have to be borne by the middle class, which is already shrinking. And it will even start being moved down into some of the lower classes. Will eventually have to be paying some sort of net tax. And it's.
I don't want to stay on taxes too long, but I do want to do one thing while we're talking about this, because I think that's a mixed point. I think you're true. I think you're true. Well, I think you're right. How true that is. I think is arguable, but I think you covered that well when you said, look, it's not going to be everybody. It's not. So the question is how many, and it's again Overton window. It's degrees based on. But I'd forgotten. I'd once studied sort of what would the effects of a consumption tax be, and I don't honestly remember. I do know that there's a lot of arguments that would slow the economy down and so on and so forth. I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty of that with numbers or anything, but you did mention to me at one point a consumption tax. So what would a consumption tax look like roughly, and what would be the benefits of something like that?
There's a really good book. If you're actually interested in a consumption tax, and I think the consumption tax is probably one of the better ways to go about taxing. There's an actual proposal out there. It's called the fair tax. And from all of the taxations that I've seen, it seems to live up to its name the most. There are some issues that have to be worked through with it, but it's essentially a national sales tax that they tack on to everything that you buy. The more wealthy you are, you tend to buy more things, and the poorer you are, the less you tend to buy, at least retail goods. And especially in an environment where consumption isn't necessarily a good thing. We care about the environment. We don't necessarily want to be consuming all of our resources today. We might want to save some of those resources for the future. So it's not necessarily, consuming isn't necessarily the end all and be all of everything. So having a consumption tax does a couple of things. One, it raises revenue for the government, which it does need. There are legitimate functions for our federal government that they need to be doing, and we need to pay for those things. But beyond that, go ahead. Beyond that,
please.
So you have to do that.
I mistook a long pause for it. I was just like, he sounds like he's in the middle of an idea, but it's a long pause, and so I just jumped. But please finish.
Yeah. No. So it was one of those. I was trying to recollect my thoughts. So it's just. It takes the IRS, which is one of the most frightening and most powerful agencies on earth, for what it can do to an individual. I mean, you want to talk about tyranny, the IRS is a very good example of a tyrannical government. I mean, the thing is scary what it can do. And you can't really even get away from it.
Let me interrupt real quick. They actually, the IRS, and there's several questions in the live chat, which I really want to address. I think there's some great questions, so I will get to them. But the IRS also is able to invert the burden of proof. If the IRS says you stole money, you actually have to prove you didn't. That's what the process of an audit is. But the IRS is the only organization in the entire country that can invert the burden of proof. Why? Because they are collecting money for Uncle Sam. Anyways, so I think you brought up a good point. Please continue.
Yeah, so, the IRS is a pretty scary entity. And under the fair tax, the IRS, it would still be there, but it would become more or less an accounting agency. It would still be an enforcement agency against businesses, because businesses would be the ones tasked with collecting the consumption tax. So it kind of just like they do now. The IRS would never deal with individuals ever again. You went to work, got paid $10 an hour, you worked 10 hours, your check would say $100, period, end of discussion. You wouldn't have to send any kind of tax information to the IRS. The IRS would never talk to you about your income or any of that kind of stuff ever again, because you would be paying your tax every time you bought any retail goods. So, and it's, businesses, it's a pretty risky thing for a business to try and defraud the government in that way. So, I mean, I don't really buy the conspiracies that businesses are going to get together and try and defraud the government. It might happen a few times, but we've seen what the IRS can do. So but it removes the IRS from most people's lives, at least in an individual's life. The only people dealing with it would be businesses. It eliminates the FICA taxes. It eliminates the corporate tax rate. So your corporate tax rate would be 0. You want to talk about, you want to build the industries of America again, and you want businesses to come back to the United States. One of the best ways to do that would be to offer a 0 corporate tax rate, because every company in the world is now going to want to headquarter in the United States, because they won't be paying any taxes. I mean, the amount of labor does matter, but it doesn't matter as much as compliance. Now, if you listen to the Fair Tax book, and it's been a while, they actually pulled the numbers. And at the time, it was in the millions of dollars every year that is spent on just tax compliance. That is money that is spent just to comply with the tax code that could have otherwise be spent more efficiently in better areas. And in every single instance of a country simplifying its tax code, tax compliance has gone up in every single instance. I have never been able to find a single instance where the simplification of the tax code resorted in less tax compliance. So it's one of those things. It's a lot of the numbers have changed because the last 5-8 years, the amount of debt the government has actually accrued has grown exponentially. It's not a linear growth right now. It's like a hockey stick right now. But so that would need to be changed a bit, because that book came back out in like the late 2000s, I think. Right, I'm trying to remember the author's name. I'll remember it later.
So, okay, so let me, wow, there's a lot of good points being made. Like I said, I mean, I remember looking at this a long time ago, and I haven't thought about it in quite some time, but essentially what you'd be talking about is a tax, almost like a sales tax. It's a consumption tax, but it's collected by the businesses. You would make essential products like food exempt, or you would, you had the prebate thing, which is probably even better than that, but for shorthand, because I don't want to get bogged down in this too much right now, but essentially necessary items would be exempt from it, but you wouldn't pay income tax on the money you make. You would pay when you spend your money. Now, the largest objection to this that I know of is that slows down the economy because people don't want to spend as much when the price goes up. I think there are counters to that, but like I said, I want to go forward on this because I don't want to just like have a tax show, and I think we should have an expert to discuss it.
Yeah, you could spend hours. Yeah, you could spend hours getting into the kind of the details about it. Essentially, it's like whatever you tax, you tend to get less of. Whatever you subsidize, you tend to get more of. Well, taxing income means, by definition, that you're going to end up with less income in the country, and we don't want to be taxing the income. We want people to be making more money, and that would be a great way of doing it because we're no longer taxing your income. So, but government still has to be funded, so there has to be some sort of tax mechanism. Just having looked at all the different things, I think that the fair tax, specifically that proposal, which would require a constitutional amendment in order to do, but I still think that's probably one of the most fair and effective and efficient ways of collecting taxes for the United States. But there's a lot of problems. The tax code we have now is so horribly convoluted that nobody knows even what it says. So
you pretty much had me at the I would never have to submit taxes to the IRS ever again. So it's an interesting proposal. Like I said, I think we need to have on an expert to discuss it. But I did want to discuss a couple of things that we mentioned because we've said some nuanced things, and I'd like to make sure that we don't leave with any misunderstandings about the discussion or anything like that. But so let's see. Let me actually get back to Brainy Beaver, who may or may not still be here. But yeah, the name of the show. I didn't have time. It was a last minute thing, and there's been a lot going on in the last couple of days, so I apologize. Yeah, he's right about the show. I'll work on it. Thank you for the constructive criticism. I appreciate it. Titan said if the wealthy paid their fair share of taxes, I do think, and you and I have had this discussion, I won't get too much into it, and the time that I think we were the most successful as a country was the 60s. There's a lot of reasons for that, at least economically. You had the one stay-at-home parent, one parent who single income household. They could pay for college too, and the marginal income tax rate was 93%. You had said earlier that many of them weren't paying that, and I've looked into it, and there is a lot of truth to that argument. So again, another nuanced one, but that was at least the marginal tax rate at the time, and as Titan had pointed out, again, getting people to pay is another thing. But now the marginal tax rate is nowhere near that. Somebody had brought up capital gains tax, but that is, last I checked, only about 14%. When someone tried to up 14, I think it was when somebody on Mitt Romney tried to up 14% to, I think it was 18%. Cries of socialism, and I was just like, socialism is going from 14% to 18% on capital gains. We were at 91 to 93% on marginal tax. I think we can do that percentage. But so I do think it makes sense to me that you need a kind of a scale. Does that mean that the wealthy are somewhat disincentivized at the top end from, well, maybe not. I think Mark Zuckerberg would keep doing what he's doing. So would Elon Musk if their taxes were higher. I think they do it because they love it. But I do think you'd also lose some people who would say, I'm not going to put in that extra effort because the taxes are so high. I'm not saying tax them into oblivion, but I think a graduated tax, if it were done right and if it were paid, makes a lot of sense to me. Again, the consumption tax idea notwithstanding. Bregwin had brought up social programs, and I was mildly concerned that someone might get that impression that, we're saying, or that I'm saying, and I know you're not saying this, neither of us, I think, are saying that you should cut all social programs or social programs aren't important. You're a traditional conservative. I'm a reasonably traditional liberal, which means that I do believe in more social programs. I think that the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, that we are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the same way that it's actually funny, the Soviet Constitution had more rights and privileges than the American one did originally. And the right to a lawyer was actually written into the Soviet Constitution. It wasn't written into the U.S. Constitution. It was interpreted later by the Supreme Court. I think it was a correct interpretation. It was a liberal one, but it was a correct one. I think you're entitled to a lawyer because if you don't get one, you cannot. You're host. If the state has a lawyer and you can't pay for one, game over. You're going to jail. I don't care whether you did it or not. But I think in that same way, especially in the richest country in the world. I do think that the notion, it's not the Constitution, that's why I pointed out earlier, it isn't the Constitution, but I think nonetheless that the spirit of the Constitution is to guarantee that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and that must include some measure of health care. That absolutely has to include it, and there has to be more than just coming into the ER to get your ticker swapped out when, if we got you free statins and a regular checkup, that would be better for our citizens and better for the economy. But to circle this around to the topic, the problem is we are in an unsustainable level of debt. The problem is if this continues, I see no way around the fact that this will cause the failure of the United States of America financially. I don't know what that means. As Andrew, I think you brought up, it could mean any number of things. It could mean the government collapses and we form as something new. That's essentially what happened to the Soviet Union. It could mean any number of things. We cannot continue at this level. We also, as much as I would like to tax the rich a lot more, and as much as there's precedent for it, and as much as it worked, the reality is we have to work with another side, and right now we have to ask ourselves how tenable that is. So the question is, what is a tenable solution that can keep us from having this debt continue? Because right now that I can see, everybody's just ignoring it. And unless I'm missing something, I'm not an economist. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe it really doesn't matter. I've been told that by people who have studied this more than I, but I don't think that's the case. So if it is the case that the debt matters, we have to get that under control. And we just spent, I think it was $5 trillion on COVID relief. And because we split the difference and gave that money, and even you, if I recall, agreed that a UBI would actually have made sense in this case. And if we had done a UBI, at least that money would be coming back into the economy and would have something to show for it. COVID is starting to get worse than ever, and I haven't seen much out of that $5 trillion, which is a staggering amount of money. I do think we spend as if we have an unlimited wallet, and I think we do that because we are not suffering any consequences for it. And, in World War II, we suffered consequences, and we knew we had to be involved. People don't...
Yeah, there was rationing.
Yes, exactly. And you had pointed this out earlier, too, and I think this is true. Most people have no idea what the U.S. government is really spending its money on, and the reason is because it's not affecting our wallets. It's just not. If the government couldn't deficit spend, I think this is the point, maybe this puts it a little bit better. Let's assume for a second that the U.S. government could not deficit spend, which was one of the hypothetical I gave earlier. They can't deficit spend, and every penny that is spent by the government, you account for in your taxes immediately. You'd care more about what the government is spending its money on. If you saw that it spent $300 trillion on advertising for seatbelt safety, you might sit there and say to yourself, I believe in seatbelt safety, but A, do we really have to spend $3 trillion on it, or whatever the example was? Is that really a good use of our money? The government, the amount of waste that goes into government projects, and projects that don't get seen through, and we're just sort of used to accepting that. But if this were a household, we would not accept that and would sit there and say, no, the money is needed for legitimate projects. But because we have deficit spending, every project can be a legitimate project. And so we don't sit there and say what's really important and what isn't. And even though I'd love to say they're all equally important, and in my mind, they always kind of have been for a while, I'm sitting there going, it seems to me to be a little bit like Fantasyland, because the debt cannot continue to go up. It just can't. I've seen no math that says that this country can survive if it keeps going up. So if we don't find some way to account for this, I don't know what we're going to do going forward. And taxing the rich, I think, is a decent start. It may work, but I don't see us being able to successfully do that anytime soon. And since this is a crisis that seems to me to be looming in this generation, certainly, so in the near future, maybe 10 years, I don't know, I haven't looked at the numbers enough, but that would be just a guess, then we need to start looking at how we're going to solve this problem and saying, well, tax the rich. Well, if you know how to pass that, that's one thing. But this is going to end up with some kind of compromise, I think, and I think it's going to have to be done reasonably soon. A sales tax, a consumption tax, some kind of revamping of the code. I don't know. The code is more I mean, I've talked to anyone from other countries. They take a look at our code. They're like, "What the fuck are you guys thinking?" It's like, I don't know. And if you've ever dealt with the IRS, oh my God, there's the 13th circle of hell, and then there's the IRS. But anyways, I don't know. What do you think? Did I accurately sort of summarize? Tax the churches. That's a big start too. Tax the church, and that leads to another one too, by the way, which is it's going to sound like it's completely different. I don't think it is, but your loved one dies. You want to inter them in a cemetery, and we do that. My father died about a year ago, and so you think about these things. We can't keep doing that forever. We're going to run out of land. We're already using up usable land for this, and nobody wants to talk about it. That's a morbid subject, and it's a depressing subject because everybody wants to bury their family. Everyone wants to treat their family with dignity and respect and the love that they had in life. But you're sitting there going like, wait a minute, we cannot keep doing that forever. 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 1,000 years from now, assuming we don't find another planet and just bury everyone there. I don't know. Unless you want to go the Soylent Green route, there are traditions and aspects to how we operate that are just not tenable going in the future. And the reason I bridged the two, even though they're two kind of different things, they're both this fantasy land kind of thinking. And that we don't need to tax the church. We can give up all that land, and we can just keep spending money forever. I don't know. Is that completely disconnected? Was that a squirrel moment, or does that almost make sense?
Well, I mean, you're linking two things that are ultimately not sustainable, and there's going to have to be some sort of change going forward. And look, the truth of the reality of the situation, is there is a certain segment of the population that is not capable of caring for themselves. A lot of them through no fault of their own, and there has to be some sort of accommodation made for that. We have to recognize that is simply true. And there's also a portion of the population that could do for themselves, if they were made uncomfortable enough to actually put forth enough effort to do it. There are definitely people that are like that. There are definitely people that it's like they can't help themselves and they need help, and we need to help them. It's the humane thing to do. There's both kinds, and it's very difficult and very complicated. It's not an easy thing to pick through. And of course, since we're just throwing all of these topics out there as though we can solve them in an evening of just, chatting, it's like everything is far more complicated. It's like we are where we are for a reason. And if people think that they can unwind stuff like this, as quickly as they want to see it happen. You want to see the rich pay their fair share because you don't think they're paying enough. Well, that's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take time because things have gotten where it is for a reason. We've seen more and more power and wealth collecting among a smaller and smaller percentage of people, and they've got quite a lot of power. We've seen, the de-evolution of our constitutional republic start being devolved, and our market, free market-based economies being devolved into corporatism and crony capitalism. That's an absolute problem today. We are seeing a widening. Yes.
You're also, by the way, and for multiple reasons, not just any single one, but for a number of very good reasons, you are against, if I understand correctly too, the huge disparity, without getting into how to solve it, because I think we might disagree on that, but you are against the huge disparity between the uber wealthy and the poor in this country. Is that true?
Yes. I was just about to mention that.
Oh, okay.
The concentration of wealth in fewer numbers of people at the top, the slow degradation of kind of the middle class, and the wealth disparity between the bottom rungs and the top rungs is growing, and it's growing pretty quickly at this point. And there has never been any kind of country or any other organization, tribe, anything where wealth disparity gets to a certain point, it gets to a tipping point, and it collapses. This is what we saw in the French Revolution. This is what we saw partially in the Russian Revolution. That is a very real problem. And we so far haven't come up with a good way to solve it. And it's like every system of government that has ever been tried produces inequality. know, all of them do. It seems that capitalism produces it the slowest to a point, that you do reach a point where it tips over into more like cronyism and corporatism, and it accelerates very quickly. And it is a huge problem because we're talking about, collapse of nations is caused by this. So yes, it is a huge problem. And, there hasn't been a very successful solution to it throughout history. Hopefully we can find a better solution for it. How do you take money from people who are just that driven to make it, or that lucky to be able to inherit it? Although I would argue that, the statistics show that more of the wealthy people actually earned most of their money versus having inherited it. But there certainly are people that have inherited their fortunes. It's a difficult topic, and it's a serious problem. You can't have disparities like that in functioning societies. Those societies collapse. Well, that's another thing that has to be addressed. I mean, it has to be.
That was a huge part of why Rome collapsed. That was the French Revolution. So as you said, if you take a look at the collapse of any number of civilizations, the best, one of the better indicators of it has been what has the disparity been between the ultra rich and the poorest in that country. That's a huge indicator, and the U.S. has really already hit the area where if I was a historian looking back at this time, I'd say, oh, I'm going to make some predictions about what the next 10 to 50 years is going to look like based on those numbers. So it's a little scary, and I do think, and this is one of the ones, you had said this before, and I really like this, where you had said that liberals and conservatives actually often agree on, and here's Oz is diving in. What the hell's going on here? Yeah, hi Oz, welcome. We often agree on the problems. It's the solutions. So for me, it's like, well, hey, there's too many rich people, tax them. But all that aside, I think one of the things I'm trying to say, and one of the things I'm doing here as much as anything, is sort of vamping. I'm kind of working out some of these ideas, and you've had some ideas that I don't feel qualified to put any significant opposition to, and maybe they don't deserve significant opposition. I haven't, but I'm glad we're talking about them. I think they deserve significant opposition. Any good idea deserves significant opposition, because if it's a good idea, it has to be able to stand against significant opposition. Well said. Well said. So I don't feel qualified to do that. So I'm trying to just sort of say what I like about it and eat around some concerns without getting too much into it. And I end up demonstrating just how over my head I am. But the one of the things that I guess I'm shooting for is, it is irresponsible that Americans are not more connected to the budget of this country, and I understand why we're not. It's fucking impossible. There are people who spend their lives studying it and can't understand it, and we have bills to pay, we have families to raise, and we should. The reason we're in a republic, the reason this isn't an actual democracy, is so that we don't have to learn all of the policies. We hire people to do that for us. They're called our legislators, and their job is to understand it better than we do, so that we can live our lives. But having said that, if we are so disconnected from it that we don't actually, we're asleep at the wheel. We're not paying attention on what's being spent. And one of the reasons is because we don't suffer the consequences for it. I can't think of a single liberal proposal that I have ever in my head turned down. And some of them, I remember sitting there going, that sounds like an awful lot of money to spend. It sounded like a boondoggle, but I was like, yeah, but it has a shot at working, and it has a shot at improving things, so let's do it. And that's really sort of my default go-to position. And if I'm going to sit there and say that the rich should pay more, and I think they should, and maybe quite a lot, I think there's arguments behind there, or we should switch to a tax like you had recommended, which I think has a lot of pluses to it, whatever it is. It should also be the case that I should have to suffer some too. I've been a beneficiary of these programs. A lot of these have been programs that I've wanted, and I am willing to pay more if it means that every American gets health insurance. I am so for that yes, you can tax me directly and raise my taxes to do that. But if you do, I'm going to be a lot more inclined to make sure that the program's working well and that they're not spending $1,000 on a toilet seat or whatever, and all the other sort of half-baked things that are sort of true and aren't, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. And I don't do that right now because it's just sort of like I don't actually have to pay the taxes. I don't have to do anything about it. I told my buddy Obama, I said, go out there and get us health care, and he got us health care, and I never actually said what's the cost going to be in any meaningful sense, because there is no cost to me, really, right now, or at least any time in the near future, and that's moral hazard. That is the definition of moral hazard. I think you used that word beautifully. I think that was the absolute word, and that's, when we talk about economics, that's moral hazard, and in all cases, moral hazard is a problem, all cases. That's why they call it moral hazard.
Yeah, see, people, I am not against things like social programs. I'm not against them. I may not agree with where those social programs should be, managed. The farther away from the people you get, the more convoluted, the more inefficient it gets. The closer you can stay to the people, the more efficient it gets. The more, the people who really need the help tend to get the help. Those who are just freeloading the system, which I don't think are a huge proportion of the numbers, but you can kind of ferret those kinds of things out. So we can have some discussion about who should be managing some of these things, but I'm not against them, but they need to be paid for. The people need to bear the burden of these things so that we, and once we bear the burden of these things, so we can decide which things are worthwhile and what things are just not giving us enough of a return to justify spending it. It's causing the general population more harm than it is helping, who it's supposed to help. We need to be able to find those kinds of things, and we need to be able to get rid of them or revamp them and find something more effective. And, we're really not doing that right now because, we can just borrow more money.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, and here's the thing, I work as an anti-theist a lot. Used to a lot. I don't anymore. When I say work, I mean I got that was the whole atheist codex thing, and I was actually getting paid for it, which is interesting. But and I in general don't do that, and I certainly try not to do that too much on this show. But one of the toughest things when talking to a theist, if for some reason you feel compelled to try to challenge their beliefs, which I don't recommend unless there's legit reason, and on occasion there is. Usually there isn't. It's just atheists being bullies. But nonetheless, if you're really engaged in some kind of anti-theistic argument, the hardest thing is to get people to accept facts and to not let wish thinking and not let sometimes a genuine desire for beautiful things like a God that loves everybody and a soul and an eternal life, or you're going to get to see your children again after you die, or if you already lost a child, God forbid, you're going to get to see them again. And trying to get them to look at a cold, harsh reality when the alternative is something that has no real evidence and no basis in reality that anyone can find, but is still so pleasing, is really hard. And the number of atheists that I've met that say, well, we're rational thinkers and we do that. Well, you've done that on one topic, but as we had, and we're going to have, I think we're going to try to have on next week, Todd, Dr. Todd, I've forgotten his last name, but you never got to meet him. He was on before your time, but we decided we'd bring him back to discuss critical thought and the fallacies that we all make, and how even really intelligent people still do this shit. And I forget who he was, but _𝐬𝐬𝐿 had mentioned him earlier, the guy who basically wrote the book on fallacies. And somebody had said to him, okay, so you don't do these things. You know better. He goes, no, my brain is still hardwired to do it. I do it all the time. I've learned sometimes to identify it and to try to find techniques to work around it, but I'm just as susceptible to this as anybody. And so you find these atheists who say, I'm a rational thinker. Okay, we are spending more money than our country can afford to spend, period, end of discussion. Right now, nobody has on the table a solution to fix it. Now, even if you tax the rich people at the levels that I'd like to tax, which are reasonably aggressive, they're not in my view. It is getting a little closer back to the 80s, and it's also graduated. It's not like as soon as you make $1 million, we take 90% of it. No. But nonetheless, I'm on the little more aggressive end of this. But even on my more aggressive end, it's not going to be enough. It's just not going to be enough. It's going to be a huge help. It's not enough. So we have to talk about part of what got us into this mess, and part of that is liberals who have been spending a blank check. And the other part of this, and this is extremely important, and I'd forgotten it, and I want to bring this up. I've said this before. We'll say it again. U.S. spends more money on our military than every other country in the world combined. And of the top 26 other countries, 24 of them are allies. And we spend more money than all of them. If you take all the bases that exist in a country that is other than the owner of the base, so foreign bases, foreign to any country, 95% of them are owned by the United States. Why? Why do we need that? And that's mostly conservatives. That's where the conservatives are sitting there going, well, security, the national, and I'm not including you because I'm pretty sure this isn't.
It's not. It's not security. They may talk about wish thinking again. They think that it's security. No, it's not. We don't maintain all those bases for security of the homeland. We have large oceans to the east and west of us. We've got mostly friendly countries to the north and south of us. We're not generally being threatened. There are some rare exceptions. But here in the United States, we are not genuinely threatened by pretty much any other country, with, again, that caveat of there are a few rare exceptions. We maintain those bases for world power and influence. We want people to do what we want them to do to benefit us. And a lot of those dealings can start getting pretty shady as well, which is where a lot of people, I think, rightfully say, look, the United States is not such a pure virgin as to be out there in the world saying, you guys all suck and we have the way. But that's why we maintain all of that stuff, is for world influence and the projection of our own power, which is essentially backed by our military. The United States is an empire. The only thing it doesn't do is collect more territories, but it does everything else an empire does.
We are a Pax Americana, and that's another uncomfortable one to look at. But we are. That's the only. I think you're right. Thank you for correcting me, because you're absolutely right. That's why we have those. And I think you're right too. Which is, most of the people who advocate for those bases know it. And when they say our security, it's the same thing that we've always heard. It's actually fascist, really. It's the same thing we've always heard with our security, right? When we have to, we have to pat down people who look that way or talk that way or aren't from this country for our security, when as much as anything, it's just an extension of our power. And it's just a way to control things and make sure everything fits into the box that we insist on. But we don't need most of those bases. We really don't. And if we got rid of about 80% of them, by the way, the unemployment rate would go up, would be doing significant numbers damage to our military, and would have to have programs for that, would have to have solutions for that. I'm not saying it's as simple as all that, but by the way, they don't seem to mind closing liberal, sun, the boondoggle that ended up getting into trouble, that solar power thing, and that deserved to close, to the best of my knowledge. But nobody sat there on the conservative side and said, whoa, let's worry about their jobs. They only worry about the jobs when it's the military. And every time when it's Air Force, I forget I want to say Andrews, it's not Andrews, but there's a military base reasonably close to me, and they keep talking about closing it, and every time it doesn't, they talk about it, our congressman comes up, and one of the arguments he uses is the loss in jobs. And I was like, I'm sorry, the loss in jobs cannot be an argument unless you're for welfare. If you're for welfare, then fine, let's keep the businesses open just for welfare, but then let's do it not for the military, and let's just start paying, why not just start paying welfare? Let's just start writing checks to people. That's a lot easier. We don't have to keep a military going. But at any rate, yeah.
Well, they proposed that. It's called UBI.
UBI, yeah. Well, and so I guess what I'm saying is I'm perfectly willing to say that the rich are going to have to pay more, and that's one of the downsides of being rich. My father always used to say, never, ever wish to be rich. It's a horrible existence in many ways. It's one of the highest suicide rates in the country. One reason is because you don't have any friends anymore. The only friends you can have are other rich people, because you know one thing when you're friends with another rich person. They don't want you for your money. Everybody else, you never know. Are they being nice to you just because?
Well, they're less likely.
Much less
they're
likely.
Less likely to like you because of your money.
If they're completely rich, if they're as wealthy as you, they probably don't want you for your money. They've already got plenty themselves. So, but he said, look, if it's a choice between dirt poor and filthy rich, choose filthy rich. That is a problem to have. Don't ever think it's not a problem, though, and don't ever think it's actually an easy life, and you're always worried about something, and you still have problems, and you're still going to die. So, of burdens in this life, it's much better to have the burden of filth. I'm not going to say it's easy and the filthy rich have it easy. They don't. That's a fucking lie. And I've met enough rich people and had enough rich friends that I know it's a lie. But I'd still rather be filthy rich than dirt poor. But he said, middle class, upper middle class, you got enough money to do the things you want, but you're not burdened by it, and you're not owned by your own resources. So I'm for adding to their problems somewhat and saying your life is still easier than everybody else's, so we're going to tax you more. But that isn't going to do it. So if we're going to just sit here and say, all we're going to talk about is taxing the rich, that's not compromise. And I keep saying that I want conservatives to compromise, so I have to be willing to compromise. And one of those compromises is I have to be willing to say, why haven't we looked at how much we've been spending? And a huge part of that's the military. Absolutely. In fact, that's probably the biggest. So I get really pissed when a conservative says that has to be off the table for some idiotic reason, because it's insane. It's alarmist. 9/11 happens, and we're all like, you see, we can be hit. Osama bin Laden had been trying to hit us for 20 years. The analogy I used was you stick Ray Charles in front of a dartboard and give him 30 darts. He's going to hit the bullseye eventually. Doesn't mean he can see. And sorry for the Ray Charles fans. I always get pushed back on that one. But we need some security. The level of security and the amount that we are paying for it is not sustainable, but that's not going to be the only solution. I'm sorry. That's not going to be the only solution, and we have to take more responsibility. All of us, including those of us who want kind of a nanny state, and I actually really do. I'm a fan of the UBI. And you even suggested that there were times for it. So it's my point is, I guess when we were talking earlier, and I've been circling back to this, we've been talking earlier about feeling the sting of social programs. I do think that everybody with a good intention doesn't necessarily, if you don't have to pay the consequences of doing that good act, it becomes really easy to do every good act or everything that looks like it might be a good act that comes across the table. You don't sit and examine it. You don't evaluate it. And I think we all need to stop doing that. And the military is a bigger problem. And let's not pretend like I'm ignoring that problem. But we need to fix the solutions all the way across the board. Anyways, I think that's what I'm workshopping right now. I don't know. What do you think?
I actually talked to somebody who was fairly wealthy. I mean, he wasn't like a billionaire, but he was a multimillionaire. And he mentioned something, and it's something I'd heard before too, so it wasn't just from him. But he did mention one of the things, and I've felt it to a lesser extent. It's like, the wealthy don't necessarily have fewer problems than the poor. Their problems just come with a lot more zeros attached to them. And I've seen that just owning and operating my own truck. It's like I make more than the poor in the country do. I would say I'm kind of solidly right dead center of the middle class. But I look at some people talk about their problems, and it's like, the transmission's going out. That's going to be a $300 bill to get it rebuilt. And I'm going, oh my God, if my transmission went out, you realize that's $6,000. That's not just a $300 bill for me. That's $6,000.
Well, and you've been
my engine $21,000. It's like my problems come with a few more zeros attached. But I don't have any fewer problems than the wealthy do. But one thing I do have is more access to opportunities. And the wealthier you get, I think that's what your wealth grants you, is you get a wider variety of opportunities, a wider variety of options for what you can do or what you would choose to do. You don't necessarily have fewer problems, but you have potentially more solutions that you can pursue. And the poorer you get, the fewer opportunities, the fewer solutions you have to your problems.
There you go. And that's what I think you got it. And one of the things I was going to say was, no, the rich do have fewer problems because if you have a heart attack, you can get treated, yada, yada. Well, no, that's the same problem, but it's they have the solution. And that's why I'm sort of for universal health care, is because at least it gives the opportunity of health care on that one to everybody, regardless of of income. Now, Maya had said something too, which bears repeating, and this is one of those tough things because this is a nuanced conversation, and this was sort of a more shooting the shit, and here we are. This is, I think, Fabio got me all worked up, but oh God, after the example you gave, now I'm all, yeah, thank you for the imagery of the United States as the whole king, and now I said Fabio, and then I had the, okay. Got me all worked up on some of these topics. Maya pointed out something, I think this is interesting, especially in the 80s, this idea of taxing the middle class more, and proportionately. I mean, if there was a flat tax, the wealthy would be paying more. Mitt Romney paid, in the year that he ran, he paid 13.7% of his income in taxes. His secretary paid 14%. So his secretary, who made a lot less than he did, paid more. Now, part of that is because of how capital gains works, and you and I had talked about capital gains and also a wealth tax and taxing money. You have to be very careful taxing people like Bill Gates is easier to tax. Who is it? Elon Musk and Facebook guy. Zuckerberg. Yeah, Zuckerberg. You have to be very careful taxing them because they don't actually have that money. That's a concept that most Americans became much more familiar with in 2007, 2008, when they said, hey, my home's worth $1 million. That means I'm a millionaire. No, that means on paper, your house is worth $1 million. You don't have $1 million till you sold your home. And that's an extraordinarily important distinction, especially if the housing market collapses. Zuckerberg is a billionaire on paper. If he sells all his Facebook stock and he gets the current value for it, then yes, that's how much money he would have. The problem is the second he starts to sell the stock, what happens to the value of the stock? It goes down. Why? Because he's selling it. He is adding to the supply. The demand hasn't gone up, so the price goes down. So it's supply and demand, very basic. Every time he sells a stock, his net worth goes down. And there's no easy way to calculate that. So we just say, okay, he's worth that. Well, that's what his stocks are worth. He will never get that for his stocks. So if you're going to tax him based on that rate, it becomes difficult. This is why the consumption tax or a sales tax makes much more sense, because now you're taxing only money that has been actualized. Elon Musk, Zuckerberg are some of the richest people on the planet on paper. It hasn't been actualized, and until it has, it could literally change overnight if things go south. If there's if there's an explosion at a Tesla plant and it turns out that there was some negligence there, even if it wasn't Musk, if the value of that company drops to zero, he ain't a multi-billionaire anymore. So
and even he'll even point this out too, and Musk is a really good example of this. Zuckerberg to a lesser extent, but Elon's in a really kind of unique position because he hasn't really diversified. It's like his wealth is really entirely based upon the value of his companies, SpaceX and Tesla and a couple of other things that he's been doing. And if those companies were to collapse, he would be among the poor people. He doesn't have lots of cash sitting around him. He doesn't own a whole bunch of homes, that he could just sell. I mean, even if you do own a whole bunch of homes, that's still not cash in your pocket. I mean, sure, you could sell one, but there's cost to selling, and it takes time. It's not money you can just go and get out in the next month. So it's like, and a lot of the wealthy are like this. You look at the wealthiest people, it's like their wealth is based off of the value of the assets that they own. It's like they don't actually have the money. They have the assets that are valued at a certain amount, and that's how we determine what their net worth is. So, and Elon Musk is almost all of his wealth is tied up in his stock from his companies. So, if his companies were to go under, Elon Musk would no longer even make the top 1,000 wealthiest individuals. So, yeah, it's how do you tax something like that? When it's like, sure, you say it's like me having this Pokemon card, and I say this Pokemon card is worth $12,000 because it's an original edition Charizard, and other people are like, well, maybe, but can you use it to eat?
Can you eat the Charizard? Can you? Yeah, so child deploys the Charizard and says, I choose this Charizard, and you just grab the card, cut it in half, and put a piece in your mouth. Go, it tastes like cardboard, but yeah, okay.
So yeah, it's you have to be careful when you start talking about things like net worth, because a lot of that's an illusionary number that has not actually been actualized. It's like when you try and actualize that money, that's when you find out how much you actually have, because my Charizard card might be worth 12,000 if I find the right person to buy it, but for the majority of the population, it's not even worth the 25 cents that I might have paid to buy it in the first place. So it's until I actually sell that card, we don't really know how much it is, because things are only worth what people are willing to pay for them. And sometimes your willingness to pay for something is directly proportionate to your need for that thing. So things like food. It's like food can be very pricey because, well, everybody needs it. So, you have to be careful when you start talking about we're going to do things like wealth taxes. It makes things difficult.
We also talked a bit about my family during the interview. It was a sweet interview. It was a nice interview. And Fabio, and he will be the first to admit, can be a bit of a curmudgeon from time to time. And so I was a little curious to see if that was going to come out in the interview. And he was very focused, very just sort of interested in and he wasn't he was asking hard questions, but there was no gotchas. It was a fun interview, and we talked a bit about my family, and just one of the things I was talking about is absolutely delightful. Now, when you're full of energy, you've had a good day and whatever, and they say and do really silly or crazy things, it's marvelous, and it just makes life worth living when you're absolutely exhausted, and they don't understand that concept, and it's been a long day and all this other stuff, and they start doing some of the stuff where you're just like, why did I used to be single, I used to be or at least married, and then we'd get to sleep in on Sundays. But one of the things that happened not that long ago was my daughter loves YouTube and watches all sorts of YouTube channels, and has decided too that In Time needs a new show, and she said she wants us to do gaming. She wants to play Borderlands 3 on In Time. I said, well, that's really off-brand. She goes, oh, I've solved that problem. I was like, how do you solve that problem? I was just like, yeah. It's like, if it was on brand, I'd do it, honey, but it's off-brand. I can't do it. She says, no, we make a new show. I was like, oh, well, yeah, but you see, we have to call all the shows, the time thing. She goes, I know. We call it Playtime. I was like, oh, fuck, she got me. I was like, holy shit, she got me. But and we've actually done it. We've streamed a couple Playtimes to Twitch. We it's all private, she's underage, so. But she's telling me about these YouTube videos she saw, and she said, Daddy, I just saw this video. My card is worth $3 million. It's just like, it's not. She's like, Daddy, we're rich. She was on that for a day. It was so hard to convince her that it's really not true. And she's just like, how do you know? Have you seen the video? I was just like, oh, you've learned to argue not enough that you know what you're saying, but just enough to be a real pain in the ass. I was just like, honey, I don't need to see the video. That card is not worth $1 million. She's like, that's what the YouTube guy says. He wouldn't lie, would he? I was like, well, first of all, yes, he would. And second of all, and I said to him, we looked, and sure enough, what he did was he found like historical eBay auctions. Didn't say that these auctions actually sold. This was just what somebody put on the auction on for. So somebody auctioned one of these for $1 million, and that I could tell nobody actually bought it. So it's just like, yeah, that's not what he's doing is not economically sound. I'm sorry, but anyway. So
and sometimes
I gotta finish the story though. Just
okay, go ahead.
She went around the house collecting all the Magic the Gathering cards and all the Pokemon cards because we were wealthy and set for life, and it was both a little charming and so like I don't know how she's going to respond when she realizes it just doesn't work that way. But anyways, please continue.
Well, yeah, and sometimes even what people will pay for some things is sometimes inflated and isn't a realistic expectation of value either. Just a few weeks ago, at the Meacham Auto Auction, there was a 1986 Grand Wagoneer that had a full frame-off restoration, sold for $148,000. Now, there's a guy down the street from me that owns a 80s, I think it's a later 80s, like an 88. Anyway, a Grand Wagoneer. And it's not in bad condition. But that doesn't mean it's worth $100,000. I have a J20 pickup truck, a 1980 J20 pickup truck. Same model era, same manufacturers, everything. Even less common than the Grand Wagoneer. It's like, but that doesn't make my Jeep pickup truck worth $70,000, even though it's in reasonably decent condition for its age. It's like, just because you can get somebody to buy something, I mean, it's the problem of the greater fool. Like, just because you can find a greater fool doesn't mean that you weren't foolish for what you did, for having paid something for that,
Last episode of the newsroom.
I had to tie that in some again because we kind of started off with
just circle back. This is
newsrooms.
You're becoming a good showman. This is just marvelous. Well, actually, I wanted to comment and point out on a couple things. First of all, just as an aside, Titan had mentioned we actually bantered about that idea. He's saying that jokingly. We needed to fill the Friday slot, and we were trying to figure out what we would fill that with. And this idea of the Titan, DIY show called Hammer Time. I think that's great. We settled on. I don't know if you heard this, Andrew. We settled on a new show. Titan's going to be hosting it, and you know what the title is?
No.
Hard Time. That's what we're going to call Titan's new show, starting on Fridays. So I wanted to get. Maya had said something about this too. One of the problems, there's a huge problem that nobody has been able to solve, and a lot of people have taken a stab at it. I talk about Hume's problem of induction. Here's this problem in philosophy that's been intractable, and nobody's been able to solve it. And we function anyway, but everybody's aware it's there. And solipsism ends up being a problem too, actually, for other reasons. But one of the problems in economics is how do you really deal with the disparity of wealth and what that ultimately leads to? And nobody's been able to stop it. Marx came up with an idea that in theory should stop it and hasn't worked for any number of reasons. And people say, well, if we could really try it, it would work, but we've never really tried it. Well, first of all, people say the same thing with capitalism. And usually people really did try it. It just got corrupted very, very quickly, and it headed south and went in another direction. And you look at it and you say, well, they didn't really do it. Well, they started really doing it, but it didn't work. And nobody's been able to come up with a solution to this. But what happens is in capitalism, it almost feeds into it, and it works well until, and I think you had started to say this, and I think this is a good point, works well. It works better than most other systems at kind of balancing that income issue until it starts to break down. And when it breaks down much faster than any of the other systems. And where it breaks down is where your increased money buys enough influence that you can make even more money without even doing anything. You don't have to spend anything. You don't have to do anything. You can buy off senators, congressmen, super PACs. This is the huge problem with money in politics, which is if a politician can't get elected without the uber rich, but then that's how Romney is the beautiful example of this, because he said, I paid the legally required taxes and, I would never cheat the system. I paid exactly what I was owed. What he doesn't say is the reason he owed less than his secretary was because a firm by the name of Bain Capital had gone to Congress and managed to get the capital gains tax reduced from what I think at the time was 23% down to the percentage that Romney paid. And what Romney doesn't tell anyone is that Bain Capital was his company. So the reason he pays less taxes is because he was able to get Congress to lower the taxes. Now, was he able to get Congress to lower the taxes because A, he had a compelling argument, or B, because he had enough money that he was able to get the audience that nobody else can get, that certainly the poor can't get, was B, the influence that they need and be able to promise them things subtly in one way or another that would assist them in getting elected, because if they don't get reelected, they can't legislate. And D, able to ultimately help them to stay elected so that they will do what he wants, as opposed to somebody else who maybe has better ideas, but those ideas aren't going to get the backing of Mitt Romney. So, and then when money starts getting used that way, it violates the basic tenets of the system. We all know this. Even Ayn Rand actually was staunchly against this kind of thing. It's what, as you said, corporatism. That is corporatism. So, or crony capitalism, and she was wildly against it for the same exact reasons. She knew what she was talking about when it came to that. So you take a look at this, and that's where capitalism starts to break down, where you get the wealthy who are able to evade the law They're able to get away with more crimes. They're able to use their money to unfairly leverage a greater use. And then instead of having where I think when Ford was running the Ford Motor Company, he made, I think it was 100 times more than the average worker at Ford. 100 times, which is quite a bit more. I forget what the amount is today. I want to say last memory was like 53,000 times more, something like that. It's just gotten so wildly out of control. And the reason is because once they start to be able to leverage that money into even more and even more obscene, Lewis Black had this great joke about it. It's just like, how much shit do you need? How much money do you need? They were having contests, some of the rich people, especially around the Bernie Madoff crew, when they were depositioning Bernie Madoff's rich friends and Bernie Madoff, and they're like, oh yeah, we were trying to find the most expensive umbrella in the world, and we had a contest to see who could buy the most expensive umbrella in the world. I bought one that was like $30 million, and I don't use it; it's worthless. But it's it was $30 million. And he goes, "How much money do you need?" I mean, it's like you and your kids, you're passing it all on to your kids, and the Walmart family. They're passing it all on. It's like, what do? You sit there and say, Daddy, let's build a space program. We can launch a chimpanzee. And I took a look at NASA's budget, and there are plenty of people who can fucking pay that. There are people, many people, and Elon Musk is the perfect example, who can start their own space program if they want to. Do you need that much money? And is it beneficial to society for any individual to have that much money? And I think you'd agree with me that the answer to that is a resounding no.
I think that it's problematic when people have that much money. You talk about Ayn Rand, and it's funny because Robert Reich's latest book, I forget the name of it.
Yeah.
And it's funny because he agrees too, and that's kind of the point of his whole book was I think it's called The System: Who Broke It and How We Fix It. I think is what it's called, something similar to that. And I don't know why, but I like Robert Reich for some reason. He's just a cute little munchkin, I guess. But and he's a very devout Keynesian, and he has pointed out several times that it's like, look, a lot of the things that we're doing now, monetary policy wise, Keynes would roll over in his grave about this stuff. It's like you can't even say that these people are Keynesian because even Keynes said, look, if we're going to backfill the dips in the economy to try and level things out, well, that means you have to shovel off some of the peaks as well. And of course, governments and business people put a hell of a lot of pressure against, the political sector when we have good times to not rain on their parade, even though their parades need to be rained on because we have to backfill that big ass hole that we filled in back there. Well, we got to get the dirt from somewhere to fill that hole in. So, what we're doing isn't even Keynesian. It's way beyond that.
And that's because that's where I think where the conservatives have been conservatives, like, we're for smaller government, except when it comes to the military, in which case it's like, you realize that's the government, right? You cannot before. Well, hold on, because I just want to quickly finish this point because it goes right to what you said. I think that's where a lot of the conservatives have they're for bigger government in certain areas. They just define it out of existence. But where the liberals go is they want to keep those hills when it comes to social programs, but they don't want to fill in they want to fill in the valleys, but they don't want to take down the hills. I think that's sort of where I was going with that. But please continue.
Yeah, and to be fair, Republicans aren't for smaller government. I mean, they may say they are, but when you look at their actions, they absolutely aren't. Government has grown under all of the Republican. I think. Oh God, I'm going to forget his name now. Grover Cleveland, I think, was the last Republican that actually maintained the whole, limited government when he declined or he vetoed the Texas Farm Relief Bill, saying he could find no warrant in the Constitution that would authorize the federal government to appropriate funds to the advantage of a select few. That's paraphrasing, but similar to what he said. And he vetoed it. It was a disaster relief bill for people in Texas suffering from drought. And he vetoed it specifically because he could not find a warrant in the Constitution that authorized the federal government to appropriate funds to the benefit of a select few people.
And since then,
certainly thrown that.
You know who the only president to balance the budget is since Cleveland?
Clinton.
Yep.
But he did it in interesting ways that I wouldn't really consider truly balancing the budget.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, so you were saying.
Yeah. So every Republican, every Democrat since then has increased the size and scope of government. And I have a love-hate relationship with Grover Cleveland. He is simultaneously
I don't think I've ever heard
somebody
those
that
words before, but please continue.
Well, he's simultaneously somebody that I actually admire a lot because of some of his political stance. Like he took a look at the Constitution and said, "Look, I don't see where in the Constitution it gives the federal government the authorization to do this. So if you want to do this, you're going to need to amend the Constitution to allow us to do this. So therefore, I'm vetoing this, even though it may be unpopular." I mean, those people were suffering. So there's that on one hand, but on the other hand, holy crap, was that guy like a misogynist? Whoa. Not somebody who you really want to look up to in other aspects of life. So it's like on one hand, I thought that he did what he was supposed to do as far as being president and saying, does the Constitution specifically authorize the federal government to do this? I don't see it, so therefore no, and signed it off. But on the other hand, just about all of his other views were pretty atrocious. They did not age well. Let's put it that way. So I have a hard time when I start talking about Grover Cleveland, just because he wasn't a really good person.
Well, so I think we're gonna the cup runneth over on show ideas. So I'd like to start wrapping up reasonably soon. It's been a bit of a longer show, but I think it's been well worth it. And I am going to end with something special tonight, I think. But so stick around for that. Don't bail just yet, because I think you're gonna want to see what I've got coming, I think. But I do want to say I do think we should have a show on also what do you do with people who are terrible in one aspect of their lives, but absolutely brilliant in others. And I think we've always seen that. Do you stop listening to Michael Jackson's music because of and all these questions that people think about. And I think that's a tough one. And we've addressed that actually before on this show, but it's been a while since we've had an honest conversation about it. So I think we should do that. But let's see. I don't know. I am getting tired. My brain is starting to wander. And you had said something I wanted to address, and I lost on the one other thing I did want to say too is there's a lot I also did want to cover. Like I said, so we had an incident. I was significantly exposed to Omicron, and I ended up sleeping for about 3 days straight. And then after that, Martin Luther King Jr., I really wanted to do that video on it, and I spent 3 days, and I did. And as Xander was trying to reach me, he's like, "How you doing?" I was like, "Later, bye." So I was a little rude, but I was just trying to. I was only getting about 3 hours of sleep a night trying to cut the video, and it wasn't quality, so we're not going to air it. But I've got a good script now for something. I think that's going to be a good video, because I do try to humanize him, and he was not perfect either. And I think that's good, because that means that his ideals, which were revolutionary and even, he would be the first to acknowledge he wasn't the first to come up with this, but he was an amazing human being, and the fact that he was also human means that I think any of us can do it if we try. But tomorrow we're gonna cover. I wanted to cover some more news today, and we've done this top, and I think this ended up just being spectacular. So thank you, Xander. But we're gonna do overtime tomorrow, and we're gonna cover just some remarkable stuff. For me, it's the Texas District Attorney now getting caught up in the 6th, and what's going on there is utterly amazing. And the fact that he is, if I recall, what happened was he was asked by the January 6th committee to turn over his emails, and he refused. Well, they're public records as the DA, and the citizens of Texas are entitled to them. So 6 Texas newspapers requested them, and he denied them too, which is in violation of the law. So the Attorney General has reached out to him and said, "Excuse me, but you are now in violation of the law. You're going to need to turn those over." And so it's just and Joe's here. So speaking of overtime, so Joe's going to join us tomorrow, and we're going to have a good overtime, and there's a lot to catch up on, and we may end up having to do news at this rate, and we would have done it again over the weekend, but it's just I was out 3 days for COVID, and unfortunately, long story that I'm not going to get into, but it looks like I'm going to be exposed again, and unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about it. I just had it, so presumably I'm not much to worry about. But the situation, I'm going to end up probably in close proximity to several people who've literally just tested positive. But it is what it is. So
Yeah, news. Holy crap! It's like I think the Supreme Court did something, and
I know, right?
Some hostages might have been taken, and so
Would've been nice.
there's been some interesting things going
some
on,
news,
and
right?
of course my news source kind of flaked out on me, so I don't really know what's going on in the world because I just heard some rumors that some of these things might have happened.
We will be catching you up to date. So
all right.
And the other thing is, you know what? There's a lot of people, and most of them are in the audience right now. Maya, Titan, Bregwin, Jake 4D, and a number of others who know how. This is actually in many ways a community program, and it's they really help curate the news. We have a discussion section. We have plenty of discussion sections for almost any topic: gaming, philosophy, current events,
wait.
Yeah,
I know that you want to lavish praise upon the people that are helping keep everybody informed. Did you know that Russia actually invaded Ukraine, and that they have taken all the way to the Dumas or whatever the hell the name river is, and that they're holding there? Did you know that?
Wait, what?
Of course you didn't, because you haven't been around.
Well,
you don't know if I'm telling the truth or not.
I know that didn't happen. That I'd know if it happened. You son of a. That I'd know.
Oh, okay.
Because I've been checking in. I have been checking in. I haven't normally. Okay. I go through and I read it.
The rest of us don't know that.
I haven't had a chance. I've been checking in. I haven't read it all, but I don't. And then today, I was sitting there going like, it's going to be a nice, leisurely day. I got a lot of other work done. I was like, oh my God, I'm back in real life. And then I was just like, well, we'll do the show, the whole thing. Then I lose the KVM switch, all this other stuff. I was just like, oh, we're broadcasting on the wrong channel. This is going to be an interesting show. So, and then I got this guest who is, oh my God, a gun-loving Republican who brings his AK-14, what is it, on and just starts stroking it. Yeah, and starts stroking it on. Yeah. Guys, I wish the camera comes on, his slide goes up. This is why he's not on camera anymore. We don't broadcast his stream. I'm getting his stream. We don't broadcast it because he's sitting there stroking his weapon. I wish I was joking.
That's so funny.
What was it you said? What was it you said when that went up?
I don't even remember now.
Yeah, I think it was.
I know.
Well, this is. Yeah.
I was cleaning something out, and the because I've actually got a gun safe in the truck, and so I've got the parts of my AR-15 disassembled and locked in the gun safe. And I was cleaning stuff out, and I happened to pick up the upper receiver, and I went, I'm going to be on camera in like 20 minutes. So I put my AR-15 back together and decided when the camera came on. Anyway, that was kind of a spontaneous thing.
And then you said, and then I'm sitting there and I see you doing that. I was like, what the hell? And you're like, isn't this what all you liberals think we conservatives do with our AR-15s? And I was just like, yeah, actually, that's fair. That's what we. And he's just like, oh, he's just stroking the rifle. I was just like, oh, fuck. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, in time, one of the co-hosts.
Insurrection.
Yeah, we are literally.
Delicious.
He's literally the conservative your mama warns you about. The gun-loving. Okay. All right, so join the Discord, and we're gonna talk about all those topics, and we're gonna catch up with all that's been going on in the news. But we also just have discussion topics on just about anything. So I'll be in there. Lots of people are going to be in there. So it's a good place to hang out. Also, if you made it to this far in the stream, like and subscribe. Leave comments. Tell us what you think. We talked about a lot of stuff. I'd be hard pressed to think that anyone's listening to this now and doesn't have a comment on either the consumption tax, flat tax, graduated tax, scaling tax, anything like that. So, any comments?
Well, I mean, we went over a lot of really huge topics, and we just kind of like nick the surface, and then so it's like, but this, and like, yeah, I because we're not taking a deep dive into all of this. There's a hell of a lot of nuance, and it's like I just said a kind of a broad statement. Then there's exceptions, and there's qualifications, and there's a whole lot of other things going on here too, and we're just kind of talking generally. So if you watched any portion of this, you had better have some sort of, hey, what about this? Because we were so vague about so many very complicated issues.
in time, the we'll talk about any subject but cover our asses show. Also the show where if you like this show, aside from liking and subscribing, please remember my name is Nicholas Lamar Suter, and I am the host of the show. If you dislike the show, please remember that In Time is brought to you by a Xandering person, and his email address is down in the bottom section of the comments. So we'll just get that.
I have a channel. You can send all the hate mail to my channel. They can watch the whole, I think, 4 or 5 storm videos that I have uploaded from me being in the truck, just to see how uploading works,
And when we were talking about the when we had that disagreement earlier about the conservative versus liberal policies relating to a UBI, I know that there's a wide disparity of opinions. So 1 in the live chat if you agree with me, 2 in the live chat if you disagree with Xandering. So we'll figure out there who's right and who's wrong. Please leave your comments in the live chat. So I said we'd end with something special. I still feel like I'm leaving something out. The Discord, leave your comments. We'll bring back to it's hard to imagine that anybody could watch 30 seconds of this and not. We sort of detonated a nuclear explosion on the topic of economics and said, well, we're not going to clean this mess up.
How to generate conversation. Now,
yeah,
it's debatable if it's actually conversation, but at least get people to start flapping their mouthpieces. Go on to a show and say something.
Yep.
Especially if you're not getting very specific. Just say general things about vastly complex issues. And if you don't get a plethora of people coming at you with yeah buts or what about this or you're just an asshole, horrible human being, you're doing something wrong.
I can't even get a 1 from Bregwin or Maya. I can't even get a 1 from son of a or a 2.
See, this is something that the rich have yet to learn, but they're going to. When you exert your power and control to rig the system in your favor, so that no matter what the outcome is, that it comes out in your favor, eventually the system's going to just give you a big fuck you, and is going to collapse. Everybody's going to go and do something else.
Leave it to you to turn some fuckery into some kind of, the more you know, the 80s, the little 80s, now you know, and no one's
we need a little star.
Yeah, the star. This is a little advertisement for, well, Nick, when you abuse your power, yeah. All right, I'll tighten winds. I think.
Hey, the rich will eventually figure this out.
Yeah, they will.
If they're not stopped, the rich will eventually figure out that what I said is absolutely true.
As they have, the last one to figure that out said, "Let them eat cake," and I that's not meant as a threat. It's really not. And I saw somebody earlier who was, I've got no problem threatening them to tell them that eventually we'll come after them if they don't change that. Listen, that's really not. I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen because as much as the system's rigged and as much as they're hugely responsible for it, they're human beings and they haven't lived the lives of other people, so they're going to be disconnected. And there's something to be said for the fact that, they're still human, they still have empathy, and they're just not where we are. Speaking of Martin Luther King Jr. and a level of sympathy or understanding that maybe he'd have. But having said that,
and even if you don't care that they're also human beings, because you think that they've done so many atrocious things that they've just forfeited their kind of right to humanity and right to life. Even if you don't, or even if you think that, look at what happened in the French Revolution. What happens when the people come for you? The people get you, and then the people aren't satisfied, and they're worked up, and they start looking for new targets. Mm-hmm. And who's to say you won't be their next target?
That's a really good point. Because then that is true, which is killing the people you hate, or doing anything. There have been plenty of people I've wanted to avenge myself upon once. I'm Batman, I'm going to avenge myself upon. And it's never... One thing I've found is all it ever ends up doing is making me feel like an asshole, and I feel worse, and I still don't feel any better from whatever it is I'm pissed about. So, and I think that happens in a mob scale too. So yeah, no, I think that's a spectacular point. And I see 2 possible revolutions coming in the future. One coming from a collapse of the economy as a result of unsustainable debt, or something related to 2008, which was still this problem, the uber wealthy manipulating the system, and it almost killed us all, and we had to bail their asses out so we didn't suffer. But that aside, and they've ensured that they can continue to do it. So, hey, lesson learned. Speaking of moral hazard, right? Because they're not the ones who had to, they got bailed out. That's moral hazard again. That's a whole other 6 shows, right? We have to have a show on that too. But that notwithstanding, the other one is the revolution that comes when you have that kind of disparity, and there's such a disconnect from the people who have the wealth and the power and everybody else, and some terrible things start to happen. I don't want that to be the legacy of this country. I don't want that to be the legacy I pass on to my kids. I'd like to avoid that. I have the least say of that of just about anybody. The people who have the most say in that are the people who are funding the super PACs and the people who are funding our senators and our congressmen and our senators and congressmen. Most certainly, I think Mitch McConnell is almost the fucking epitome of that. And he's going to get away with it. I talk every now and then about the fact that we know that sometimes the bad guy wins, and sometimes the bad guys get away with it. Every now and then, I think he's going to get hooked. I don't think he's going to get hooked. I think he's going to die happy. I think he's going to die mostly with his reputation intact, and maybe 100 years from now, and he'll never know it. He'll be seen as this horrible super villain. But right now, he's going to die getting away with it. But usually, the people who do something wrong get caught, and usually they pay a shit ton of consequences. And I think right now there's a lot of people with a lot of consequences at the door, and I don't want them to have to pay it. I'd like to see if we could just get out of it by fixing shit. And they're going to have to pay something. We're all going to have to pay something. But if we can minimize that and not have a revolution, that's best for everybody. But I think I think that's getting harder.
Yeah, I mean, revolution is a dicey proposition, because lots and lots and lots of people lose, and not necessarily just the people you want to lose. So, the only justification for revolution is when, not having the revolution ends up being a worse product. So it's questionable as to whether even the American Revolution, even though it eventually gave birth to one of the most unique and powerful in all ways countries that ever existed on Earth, there is an argument as to whether the revolution was warranted or not. Because you can't. Okay. I don't believe in just the means. The ends justifying the means. So.
Oh look, and I've never seen a channel go from 32 positive likes to negative 22,123 likes. That's wow. That's impressive. Thank you, Andrew. Good job. Well done. We didn't need to have the revolution. I'm sorry. I just have to bust your balls. I'm sorry. There's
I see ways, and it's because I'm more on the right, and I frequent areas on the right that where guns are a thing and are loved, and there's a gun culture. And generally speaking, I don't particularly care much for gun culture, but in the United States at least. But there's just way too much romanticizing about having a revolution and overthrowing the government, and it's like, it's romanticized, it's almost fetishized, and it's like you don't have a clue. You're sitting in your back Hicks country house with your overalls, can barely walk around your own damn truck to get to your next beer, let alone run a mile down the road in full kit to go stop the big bad government guy from encroaching upon your liberties. Like, you have no clue what it would be like if the country collapses, or a true revolution or a true civil war starts. You can't even begin to comprehend the misery that will cause.
Oh God!
And it's like that should not be something that you should even remotely desire to have happen. You should bend over backwards to try and stop it.
On that Karen, on the 6th, January 6th, it was just like, they pepper sprayed me. I can't believe they pepper sprayed me. Well, what were we doing? I was breaking into the. Well, were you in the Capitol?
We were storming the Capitol.
I was storming the Capitol. Why? It's a revolution, man. If it's a revolution, you're lucky you didn't get 2 in the chest. and you probably should have, considering what you had done. I'm sorry to say. It was fucking the fact that she could get so worked up about the fact that she got pepper sprayed when she's doing a revolution and storming the capital of the United States. Yeah, I think that's you've hit on one of my pet peeves, I think. So thank you for bringing that one up.
Yeah, well, it's frustrating because it's annoying because I see it so much on, kind of my side of things. And it's something I wish I could stamp out. I'm sure both sides, both liberals and conservatives, are look at parts of their sides and go, I really wish we could just get rid of that because it's not helpful and, it's actually counterproductive. So.
All right. Well, as I said, I got something special for everyone tonight. Now, some of you have seen this before. Anyone who knows me personally, I don't normally air stuff like this on the channel. It's inflammatory. It's a little unhinged, but and it's a different side of me. I'll talk about that in 1 second. But we do have a few new people have showed up in the Discord, which is marvelous, and I hope you guys will continue to do that. Now, normally, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pipe in an audio I did about 7 years ago. It was an open letter to Donald Trump. Now, normally, you have to be able to read this as you see it. And the reason is because I was channeling, what's his name? Dennis Leary a bit and going very quickly on that guy who did the Mattel cars and who could speak really, really rapidly. And I practiced this for about a month. It took me a month really to get this down right and to be able to say it. And I've wanted to rememorize the thing because people sit there and say, you can't really talk that fast. Yes, I can. There was some clipping on occasion once or twice when I made a mistake and I had to do some editing of the piece. But, that was me. That's how fast I can talk when I'm ending. So do not hesitate to slow this stream down. Move it down to 0.75 or 0.5 if it's going too fast for you. I don't think it's that funny that way, but you'll catch a lot more of the jokes that way. Anyways, this was an open letter to Donald Trump. And for some context, this was during the primaries. And Donald Trump had just come out and said that we should kill the families of terrorists. And believe me when I say he meant it. He also had no idea what he was saying. He didn't really realize that what he was saying was we should kill their children, their wives, their spouses, and so on and so forth. Had he realized that, he probably still would have said it. So I'm not going to give him all that much credit because I don't think he even realized that has consequences. I think he's a narcissist. I think he doesn't see anything outside of his own. And if he thought he could get elected by saying that we should give sympathy to the terrorists and give them therapy, he'd have said that. He's one of the more cynical people, unfortunately, as we had pointed out earlier on this show, and as Andrew had pointed out too. Thank God he's reasonably inept, because if there was somebody who was doing the kind of power grabs that he wanted to do, but actually had fucking skill and brains, we would have been in serious fucking trouble. Things got bad enough as it was. Anyways, he had Porpoise had made a really good point. Oh, yeah, I did want to say before we go, Porpoise had mentioned that Smith and I think it was Smith and another writer was Smith and Marx had talked about why capitalism causes, and she's correct. That's exactly what they had said, and I think that's an excellent point. The problems that we are facing with capitalism are exactly what had been predicted. So, nobody's found that perfect system yet, and they're still looking. So, at any rate, so this was an experimental piece. I did 2 of these. I did one on guns too, which I've always wanted to go back and clean up because I wasn't completely satisfied with it. But and now somebody
you totally should.
Yeah. Well, if I do, it would be more to clean up the ending, which was just too sentimental and too off. And there was a couple of things. I wouldn't change any of my opinions because screw you. That's why.
No, I think I actually like listening to rants like that. Even if it's against something I disagree with, because I can always rant back, and it's a lot of fun.
That's true. Well, and I did, and I meant it. I said Wayne LaPierre, who was the head of the NRA, was guilty of negligent homicide. Now that's slander. If you can't, actually, it's libel. Is it? No, it's slander. Only I'm the geek wonk who's going to sit here and argue with himself over whether it's slander, libel, or defamation.
Yeah, slander's audible. Yeah. You said it. Libel is you wrote it.
Is written, correct, and defamation is both of them. So, at any rate, I had So I said that, and then I said, if he'd like to sue me, he should, because I think that we should have that discussion in the course. So I got a little heated in both of these things. Anyways, this was a rant, a open letter to Donald Trump. Again, usually it helps if you can read it while you're listening to it. It goes by pretty quick. A little different side of your host here that most of you haven't seen before. A few of you have, and you'll be hearing it again. If you'd like to get the original, I didn't link it in here, but you can find it on my channel, Nicholas Lamar Suter. It's just an open letter to Donald Trump. I'll probably try to link it before, at some point after the end of the show with a monitor down. I'm not going to try to edit the show live. I also don't have access to my soundboard with the monitor down. So what that means is, normally we could, as Andrew and I could chat, or if Xander wanted to hit me up with a note or something while we are playing this, would be able to do that, because he and I have separate streams to the audio. In this case, I can't do that. It's only going to pump into the master audio, so I'm going to mute myself. As Andrew, if you could also mute, or and if you want to hang out and listen to the classic, you can, and maybe we'll wrap up afterwards, or you can bail. Okay. I know you've heard this one before. All right, perfect. So. Again, with one monitor down, I'm not 100% convinced I got the audio right on this, but I'm about 90% convinced. So we are going to give this a shot here. Again, Donald Trump had just said we should bomb the families of terrorists. He was running for president of the United States during the primaries. This is my open letter to Donald Trump, and let's see if I can get this to play. An open letter to Mr. Donald Trump. Warning, some profanity is used. All right, it is playing, but I can also tell that the audio mixer is not managing the sound, so it's coming in awfully quiet. I'm going to, unfortunately, I can't access the soundboard. This is going to be an interesting problem to try to solve. How do I access the sound? I know how I'd have to trick this. So everyone's going to need to give me a minute. Like I said, I'm down a monitor, and I don't have complete access to the soundboard, but I think I can trick it to give me access, and if I have done so, did it work? I'm going to try that one more time, because I'd like to access the sound so that you guys can hear. That was too quiet. At least it sounded too quiet to me. If you guys could hear it, somebody let me know in the live chat. So let me try one more time too. It's just it's an interesting problem. I've been doing the entire show down one. This is why having a separate producer usually helps, and there's no way. Okay, I have no idea at this point how I can successfully reach the soundboard, which is, unless there's one other thing I could try to do here. Maybe I have the soundboard. Please tell me I have access to the soundboard. I have access to the soundboard. All right. So we're going to move the rant. We are actually going to move. I'm going to move the rant into the other channel there. And then I'm going to up the volume on this a bit, because you guys were having a little hard time, I think, hearing it. So that is fixed. We're going to try again. Again, this is, and yes, please, if you, we had a lot of discussions. If there's anything you found interesting in this show, timestamp it, send it to someone. If you think anyone can school us, timestamp it, send it to them. We'd love to hear from them. I can be reached on the Discord. Please join us on the Discord, and we'll have more of this discussion. I believe I have the sound completely done, and I'm also going to actually, usually when the sound comes into the back like this, we hear it kind of muted. I'm going to up it a little bit so Xander can hear it better as well. So once again, this is, let me bring it back up. This is a open letter I did to Donald Trump during the primaries, right after he said we should assassinate the families of terrorists. If anyone is having a hard time hearing this, just let me know. Everything should work, so we'll give this a shot. An open letter to Mr. Donald Trump, warning some profanity is used. Dear Mr. Trump, holy fuckballs. I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry that your daddy didn't love you enough, you were bullied in school, or whatever childhood trauma you suffered that made you think that your life wouldn't matter unless you stabbed that big pussy in the air, the rest of us call us guy with a half dozen steel and concrete dicks 1,388 feet in the air with your name blazoned across them like a tramp stamp on the back of a stripper's ass, passing out lap dances for $5 a pop in some shuttered industrial lot in the downtown Detroit area. I really am, but you've got to stop taking it out on every living creature on the fucking planet, because other people have problems too. I speak 7 languages, and there isn't enough
fucking profanity in all 7 of them in the entire fucking history of the other 455 Indo-European languages combined to describe the kind of dick-sucking fuckwad you have to be to say that we should go around killing the families of terrorists. Balls the size of 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐜𝐴, but I hate to tell you that is not a requisite for being president of the United States. And it's people like you.
All right, we may take one more stab at this. Sorry, so the volume is low. And it kind of sounded low to me too, even though presumably it's been fixed. So as long as I still have access to my soundboard, which I should, I will take one more stab so there was an echo. I have no idea why this would echo. I will move it to one other channel here, and I'm going to take one more stab. All right, let's give this a shot and see how this does. Thank you all for your patience, and we're going to give this one one more shot. Okay, the gain is presumably set. All right, and let me just. Oh dear Lord, this is genuinely not fun down one screen, but first world problems, right? I'm surprised I can actually have this conversation with you and I'm not muted. We're going to try this one more time. Please, again, let me know if we're good in the live chat, and we should be. So here we go.
An open letter to Mr. Donald Trump, warning some profanity is used. Dear Mr. Trump, holy fuckballs. I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry that your daddy didn't love you enough, or you were bullied in school, or whatever childhood trauma you suffered that made you think that your life wouldn't matter unless you stabbed that big pussy in the air the rest of us call a sky with a half dozen steel and concrete dicks 1,388 feet into the air with your name emblazoned across them like a tramp stamp on the back of a stripper's ass, passing out lap dances for $5 a pop in some shuttered industrial lot in the downtown Detroit area. I really am, but you've got to stop taking it out on every living creature on the fucking planet because other people have problems too. I speak 7 languages, and there isn't enough fucking profanity in all 7 of them in the entire fucking history of the other 455 Indo-European languages combined to describe the kind of dick-sucking fuckwad you have to be to say that we should go around killing the families of terrorists. Balls the size of 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐼𝐧, but I hate to tell you that is not a requisite for being president of the United States. And it's people like you, people who have all balls and no brains, who go out and get other people's children killed. And while I don't mean to give you pause on your way into turning this country into a Sharia caliphate with enough medieval charm, compassion, and warm fucking fuzzies to make 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐼𝐧 look like fucking Jimmy Carter raving on 3 tabs of ecstasy, you might be interested in knowing what you're talking about is a fucking war crime, and not one of those, oh, hey, if we don't call it torture, then it's okay war crimes, but one of those, there's some really good practical and don't you know it, ethical reasons why we don't go around executing people's families kind of war crimes. What kind of medical grade hallucinogen do you have to be vaporizing, concentrating, smoking, re-fucking the hashing vapor before freebasing into one of those liquid nitrogen fueled ice dams you call a fucking femoral artery to not realize that if you start killing families just because of what one black sheep asshole does, that it's that kind of wanton disregard for human life that's making us enemies faster than we can kill them? Well, granted, not if you use gas chambers, but I didn't want to point that out because I don't want you to get such a raging hard-on that Julio, the night janitor at Trump Tower, who you pay minimum wage only because 2 pennies glued together with industrial-grade horseshit isn't legal tender, from having to break out his Mr. Reliable squeegee to clean off the latest Superfund site that is the top of your fucking desk every time somebody uses the words gas chamber correctly in a sentence. And you know what? Yeah, sure. I know it's nice to think that the United States of America is so star-spangled awesome that we can invade foreign countries for absolutely no reason, and I mean this. No fucking reason whatsoever. The UN, MI6, and half the world knew Saddam didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, and even if he had, he couldn't hit us with them even if he did triple the number of rubber bands on his Scud missile launchers. Clinton already got revenge for that fictitious Iraqi plot to kill baby Bush's daddy fabricated by the Kuwaitis on the off chance would be stupid enough to give them protection money, and I won't spoil the ending of that little intrigue. And the invasion certainly had nothing to do with the inhumanity of Saddam Hussein using chemical weapons that we gave him on 10,000 of his own people, because before the days when we were roasting marshmallows over the warm glow of Saddam's nuts, we didn't lift so much as a finger to stop mass genocide erupting in Darfur. And don't lie to me and tell me we want to overthrow a dictator and let the Iraqis suckle on the sweet, sweet baby juice of freedom, because we break out in joygasms at the thought of installing brutal, illegal, and fascist dictators all over the world, where they're free to kill as many of their own people as they like so long as they stay in our back pocket. Here's an idea. Before we start lecturing people on freedom, let's stop propping up countries like the UAE, Qatar, and the rest of the Middle East. We give the dictatorial Royal House of Saud money, guns, and whatever they need to ruthlessly, brutally, and illegally oppress their people, in exchange for them exercising their OPEC veto power to grant us the cheapest oil anywhere in the world. We funded the economic boom of the 90s on the backs of innocent Sauds. Did you ever stop to fucking ask why nearly all of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia? Think that might be a subtle hint that they're pissed at us? They hate our dictator-supporting, baby-bombing, nuts over there, and nobody could fucking blame them. And nobody can tell me that we give a rat's ass about freedom from tyranny for anyone but ourselves, and none of that shit has anything to do with Islam whatsoever. And of course this means we can torture people. Never mind that we used to have something called our principles and our word when we signed the Geneva Conventions, a set of rules, by the way, we expect our enemies to live by. Never mind that every country that breaks those rules always thinks it's justified and is always fucking wrong. Never mind that it doesn't work. It doesn't fucking work. We all know it doesn't fucking work, but it's cathartic and badass, and who cares that sometimes we get the wrong people? Because, well, hey, that Star-Spangled Awesome thing again, and we're on a crusade, so that makes it alright. And you burn our innocence and you burn our credibility at the altar of it doesn't fucking work. And yeah, I know, I'm a big pussy because I don't watch Fox News and get off on the idea that we rape little boys in Abu Ghraib, but at least I don't pretend to love baby Jesus and his mother as I hook up a guy's nipples to a truck battery, or pretend that I think God's gonna forgive me the shit because, well, he's the one who told us to go over there in the first place, and everything we do is right by definition. And, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to kill your buzz by letting that utter bummer of a thing called reality shatter the illusion by saying that maybe our ignorant ass actions have consequences and maybe we shouldn't be forgiven if we decide to let good intentions be our get-out-of-jail-free card that keeps us from doing the hard work of sitting down and taking a good hard look in the mirror before carpet-bombing countries 10,000 miles away. But hey, that's me. I'm part of the Blame America First crowd, thinking that maybe no means no, she didn't have it coming, and maybe somehow, in an alternate topsy-turvy universe, the children we drop bombs on do matter, didn't get what's coming to them. We're not the all-knowing badasses whose shit don't stink that we think we are, and the vast majority of Iraqis didn't want to throw flowers at us, but rather bullets instead, because the worst day they ever had under Saddam was still 10 times better than what their liberators gave them, and then to be so hung up on ourselves that we had the fucking balls to think that we were going to make them pay for it, which is really fucking gangster, and then expect that one of the little fucking ragheads wasn't going to put it together that maybe the real reason we were there is because once the Royal House of Saud finally collapses, OPEC is going to rape us like a French hooker in the back of a little alley called Rue the fucking Day, unless we find some poor little country, charge in there with our Christian hearts bleeding into our boots, talking about how much we care about them, make billions of dollars for our oil companies, and keep our OPEC veto power. But hey, we're America. We're fucking perfect, and I'm sure that the ragheads are too fucking stupid to have figured that one out. And of course I know that this shit isn't your fault, Mr. Trump, but you can't survive without the coma-inducing, fact-ignoring black hole of a right-wing reactionary constituency that you call your base. And I know why they're voting for you. They're pissed. They're outraged. I get it. I really do. They're being marginalized and trivialized in a world where you can't work for McDonald's without knowing how to use a computer, but they still can't get the clock on their antiquated 8-track Betamax VCR to stop blinking noon. So supporting a massive, bloviating bullshitter like you acts like a surrogate cock that lets them stick their chests out with pride and adopt a healthy mob mentality that lets talk about lighting a black man on fire seem reasonable, because it's easier to glom onto the fact that you don't take shit from anybody and mistake that for good policy, sound judgment, and strong leadership than to ask what real-world impact these policies will have on us and the rest of the world. It's easier to say that you're honest and tell it like it is than to compare what you say to reality and to admit that you're setting more pants on fire than an iPhone 5C. And you know what they want? What they really want? They want the world to slow down. They want information to slow down. They want to untangle the complexity and say, yes, it really can be as simple as it was in the old days before boys kissed, blacks could become president, and the planet was rejecting us like a bad organ. But you can't roll back that clock. You can't unwind that spring. You can't undo the internet or turn off 24-hour news. And in this global economy and the age of interconnectedness, a butterfly flapping its wings in Saudi Arabia really can cause half of Manhattan Island to go up in flames. So I'm supposed to say that it's okay because you represent a genuinely disappointed, marginalized, and ever-increasingly disenfranchised wing of the Republican Party that feels like the world's walked away from it? Maybe they do have a genuine point hidden somewhere in all that addle-minded insanity. But what I don't know, what I don't understand is, where's my right to be fucking outraged? We elect my guy as president, he wins fair and square, and I watch as a wash of Sea Party fucking nutheads, so-called patriots who say they understand the Constitution real good, while painfully oblivious to the fact that it was carefully, deliberately, and painstakingly written so as to force all parties to compromise on the silly fucking notion that maybe forcing people to find middle ground might not be such a bad fucking idea, too stupid to know that every article, every paragraph, every sentence, every clause, every word, and every fucking piece of punctuation all have one thing in common. They were all a compromise. And I watch as these hollow patriots throw their toys on the fucking floor and say they're going to break them all if we don't play by all their fucking rules, and I watch them bring government to a grinding halt and point their finger to my guy and say it's his fucking fault. I live in a world where Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin, and Rick Perry can all get fucking elected. Rick Perry, who gives his constituency a woody with thinly veiled suggestions about leaving the Union, but Texas ranks 40th in education, so they can't put two and two together and figure out that for every dollar they pay in federal taxes, the government gives them $1.30 back. 32% of their budget comes from the federal government, and they can't produce or sell enough oil that makes that up on their own, or operate an economy without the FDIC, Interstate Highway, or the Federal Reserve. But I've got to put up with them thinking they're doing us a favor by sticking around. Meanwhile, I get 70 cents on the dollar, meaning that my state is carrying their sorry asses, and I wouldn't mind, except that when I say I want universal health care because I'd rather pay $200 a year so that some morbidly obese guy who can't pay the parking meter because all his money goes to cheddar wurst wrapped in bacon and deep-fried bacon fat can get an annual checkup, cancer screening, and sound medical advice and free statins, rather than paying $44,000 when he keels over from a heart attack, gets dragged into the ER, and ends up needing to get his ticker swapped out while his family is thrown out onto the street because he can't work anymore. The hypocritical bastards say that that guy should be carrying his own weight. And I mind it when smug motherfuckers in states that I'm carrying deny science, deny global warming, deny evolution, and with their bottom-of-the-barrel education sit there and tell me that they're going to rewrite my textbooks and totally awesomize them and make sure that every little American cherub can learn some alternate history where Christopher Columbus wasn't a genocidal maniac, the founding fathers were all Christians who didn't fuck their slaves, and the Constitution is the inspired word of God and the newly minted 28th book in the New Testament because nobody should have to live in a world where you can't make up your own fucking facts. But I gotta sit there and listen to your shit about a liberal bias in the media when this media won't call out any of this horse shit, and they're so terrified of being called biased that they won't speak truth to stupid. So I'm fucking outraged. But since there's supposed to be a fucking run-up in the room, I can't call you and your constituents out as the ignorant, homophobic, Islamophobic, xenophobic, nationalist, racist, fascist that they are, and just sit here and take it as they complain all day. Fuck that! Because while your constituency is yearning for the Leave It to Beaver 60s, which never actually existed, I have to live in the real world with real fucking problems like climate change. But you and your ilk have no shame. No fucking shame, because you don't give a rat's ass about what damage you do to the economy for the rest of the world when you deny shit you don't understand. Here's a fucking thought. Instead of saying that the science is still out on it, or that your gut tells you it's not real, how about you pick up a fucking book, take a couple of hours, and learn the basics, see what science is saying, learn the difference between ant culture and a fucking 100,000-year-old ice sample. Hint, ice cores are warmer, have more color, more feeling, and are less desperate for attention. And instead of parroting back that line, the science is still out, you tell us exactly what's missing that the science needs to satisfy before you'll believe it. But you can't because you don't understand it. You just know that there are votes to be had and deals to be done by saying that's all a conspiracy from China, which makes you a bottom-of-the-barrel two-bit whore who'll sell out the human race for a couple of dollars and some votes. And I have to listen as your party thinks to lecture me on common sense, but I don't think you know what that means since you use it to justify judging an entire 1.6 billion people based on what 1% of 1% are doing. Yeah, real fucking common sense. Islam has the same percentage of terrorists as any religion. Protestants and Catholics murdering each other, KKK firebombing churches and lynching people, and the assassination of abortion doctors. What kind of idiots think there aren't any Christian terrorists? Here's a hint. If you go to Uganda, don't be gay, Sparky. There are fucking Buddhist terrorists, for fuck's sake. You wanna know who they kill? Muslims. Maybe the religion isn't the fucking problem. Ever think of that? Maybe it's ignorant-ass imperialistic countries who pretend to give a shit about the suffering of innocent people but really only want cheap oil and big gulps and who will carpet bomb the shit out of anyone who stands in the way of that. You want to know why education, diversity, and engagement are important? Because that gives us perspective on shit so that we don't have to be slaves to our overreactionary adrenal glands and make our own problems worse. Your folks have learned that with age comes wisdom, but they fucking gag at the notion that there's a wisdom to be found in the rest of the world and the experiences of people who've lived different lives. You want to talk common sense? Fine. Let's go on a little journey. Since Yemen in 1992, Al-Qaeda has been trying to strike on American soil. For 10 years, they've tried to blow up transatlantic flights, take out Quantico, Langley, the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel, LAX, Logan, not to mention sporting a raging hard-on for killing the Pope. And I know it's patriotic to blame Obama for his fuck-ups while not violating America's little safe space by blaming Monkey Boy for September 11th. I'm okay with that. You want to know why? Because even if Bush hadn't wiped his ass with the daily briefings that warned him of the attack, it was going to happen. If not on 9/11, then some other time. It took them 10 years and a little luck to do it, but if you stick Ray Charles in front of a dartboard with 1 million darts, he'll get the bullseye eventually, with or without Monkey Boy tending bar. But we know where the failures were, and common sense says that a few fixes at the CIA, FTSB, and FBI would have solved the problem. Instead, we hand everything over to the Republicans and say, fix this. And this, the party of the Constitution, of freedom, and of small government, create the single largest bureaucracy in the history of the human race, expand government surveillance and warrantless wiretapping, gives government sweeping powers to detain prisoners and spend billions of dollars blindly warmongering all over the Middle East, and wipe out that budgetary surplus Clinton was nice enough to provide. Every year in this country, 40,000 people die in car accidents, 40,000 people die from gun violence, 40,000 to suicide, 60,000 each to influenza, pneumonia, and diabetes, and nearly 600,000 a year each for cancer and heart disease. And if you knew the first thing about science, you'd know that we can deal with these problems. We did it with polio, we did it with antibiotics. This isn't a stretch. There are solutions to these problems that are a lot less expensive than what we spend fighting terror and keeping up 95% of the world's foreign bases which belong to the United States of America. And that's just the beginning, because we've got corporations too big to fail. And after a meltdown in 2007, which nearly ended our economy, nearly ended the United States of America with food riots, oil shortage, no electricity, hell on earth, we came within a bull's ass hair of it. The conditions are worse today, and you can't talk about it because that's not what's going to get your people elected. And our military commanders are telling us on the ground that there's no military solution to this. We need to figure out what they want, why they're trying to hit us. We need to figure out what's motivating them, which is exactly what the terrorist-sympathizing liberals have said from the start. But we already know what the problem is. It's us. We're doing it. Our actions and blazing disregard for human life and the suffering of others. And you fuckers, if you had 1 ounce of common sense, you'd see all this. Do you even remember what it was like before we were terrified of the Middle East. Do you know that everything we've done since then has made the problem worse? And even then, you're still 100 times more likely to die at the hands of another fucking American, maybe a drunk driver in a drive-by shooting, than any fucking Muslim. You want to know something? And I know I'm going to get my ass kicked for saying this, but you want to hear something? Real common sense, real truth to power? 9/11 wasn't that big a deal. It was huge. It was staggering. I know. But was it really so big that we needed to do this to ourselves, turn on our friends, obliterate a country, torture people, destroy the Constitution, and head down this Trump-gilded road to fascism? Are you fucking serious? We blew every opportunity to de-escalate, to calm down and say that every country gets hit, it was our turn, it was going to happen eventually. Let's see what we can do to keep it from happening again. But since the gun-loving reactionary Republican was in charge, that wasn't going to happen. Instead, we said, bring it on. So yeah, I got just as much of a right... Fuck that. I've got more of a fucking right to be pissed about the state of this country than your fucking narrow-minded constituency, because I've got to fight narrow-minded dicknuts like you and your boys. Do you want to know why I love the Freedom Frogs? Because these people who can make a tank for 35 cents on the dollar because it only needs to go in reverse. 2 days after the Paris attacks, these people go call up the UN and tell them to triple the number of refugees they're going to take in. You know why? Because they don't think the jury is still out on evolution. They don't bomb other countries for revenge or in the name of God, and they know that the science is in on global warming and has been for a long time. And because, unlike Sarah Palin, they know that refugees get a year of background checks before the UN release them anywhere, then we here in this country do another year on top of that. So if you're a terrorist trying to sneak into the US, it's actually a lot easier to swim across the Atlantic Ocean than to come in as a refugee, dickwad. That's right, these fucking French, who could probably actually find Sodom and Gomorrah on a map, are beating the terrorists. How? Because they're not cowering in a closet somewhere curled up in a little ball with the lights out, tears streaming down their face crying, please don't hurt me. And you know what? They're fucking scared. All of them. They're all terrified, just like we are. But they know that that's how the bad guys win. The tip-off? It's the name. Terrorist! My 4-year-old figured it out with the help of Oscar the Grouch in the first 3 chapters of Hooked on Phonics. And hey, I was thrilled. What a relief to know that American integrity, courage, and Judeo-Christian ethics are alive and well. They're just all in fucking France. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that same idiotic trope designed to bail you out every time somebody points out just how stupid your fucking ideas are. That if I hate this country so much, I should fucking leave. But I'm tired of that fucking shit because you haven't cornered the market on patriotism, and this is my fucking country too. And excuse me for thinking that maybe it can do just a little bit better than it has. Excuse me for thinking that if we really are the greatest country in the world, then maybe we should start acting like it. You know what? If you're tired of the lamestream media and educated presidents and Hollywood liberals, here's an idea. Why don't you get the fuck out? That's right. If you don't like a black president who can add, if you're scared by the internets, if you fetishize the wild, wild west, want a Bible in every courthouse, don't believe in evolution or global warming, and think women are chattel to be seen and not heard, then get the fuck out. When did you put us on the defensive by saying that we're the un-American ones and that somehow you have the better ideas and are the most reasonable exclusively and only because you shout louder than I do? You're the party of fear, and when you're not scaring the shit out of your own constituents, you're cowering my guys. And you've turned us into an empire, a motherfucking empire. And like all empires, we think we're not. We think we're benevolent, imposing our Pax Americana on the world, expecting them to be grateful for our grace, and destroying them if they're not. We're the biggest exporter of guns in the world, the biggest exporter of death, and with 95% of the world's foreign bases, over 600 of them, and a military budget equal to that of every other country in the world combined, we're a motherfucking empire. But like all empires before us, from Rome to England, we will collapse under the weight of our own military and arrogance if we don't get off of this economy of fear and death. Think it can't happen? Think it won't? That's what every fucking one of them thought. And to even suggest a more measured, nuanced approach is to hate your country, blame America first, give therapy to the terrorists, and fly in the face of American bloodlust and revenge for other countries that have intruded into our lives, and I'm fucking sick of it. And here you are, the next piece in this Orwellian jigsaw puzzle, sliding into place to highlight the utter insanity that is American politics that justifies cruelty, bloodlust, and revenge under the guise of protecting oneself in this, one of the safest countries in the world. So let's bomb the fucking ragheads and starve the wetbacks out of this Judeo-Christian Eden, where we love the Bible only so long as it lets us hate and subjugate gays, Muslims, Jews, blacks, and that whole other half of the human race that you say loves men only for their money, and in your case, I believe it, but that the rest of us nonetheless usually call women. And I've used a lot of swears, Mr. Trump, but I want you to be able to understand at least a third of what I have to say, because you don't know enough about history, politics, or the human condition to understand just 1/10 of how much I just pwned your ass. Yes, I know the fucking O is missing, but dicknuts like yourself don't get to ask why, because no matter how much money you have, that shit will always be above your pay grade. And I'm sorry if I've offended you, but I don't feel guilty because I don't hate you. I don't fucking hate you. Okay, I don't like you very much, but I don't fucking hate you because I don't respect you enough to bring myself down to the level of hating another human being, and because no matter how bad you are, you will never turn me into one of your ignorant-ass, blind supporters. And I'm pissed because the right should be doing something about your ass, because they say they put country first, but really, when Colin Powell stands up and says you can't put Sarah Palin one heartbeat away from the presidency, he speaks truth to power, you kick his ass the fuck out. So yeah, they put country first immediately after their own party. So now I have to sit here and tell you that you and your kind have been fucking me and mine over long enough. I'm gonna own my rage and say that your ignorant fuckwad constituency has done enough fucking damage. Because just like you, I want to make our country great again. And it starts by making sure that the closest thing you ever get to an Oval Office is that gold-plated throne you call a toilet, and by not letting fear, ignorance, and terrorism control the fucking agenda. It starts with compromise and working together, making friends faster than we make enemies, building schools, not leveling them, and not going alone, and by not telling the rest of the world to go fuck themselves, and by saying that the emperor has no clothes, and telling it like it is, and calling you and your constituents out for the race-baiting, Islamophobic motherfuckers you all are. Peace out!
Yes, an opinion or two worded in that one. Thank you for indulging me. I don't know. I thought that given the interview that I had earlier today, that actually hit on most of these topics, and we ended up continuing pretty much onto the show, and that we, it's the same topics. And there I did. That was 7 years ago. I did that. Open letter to Donald J. Trump. Thank you all for indulging me. Thank you, 𝐂𝐤𝐸𝐬, for showing up. You can actually find a copy of that on my channel. We'll link that, and you can always timestamp it on the show. Again, come join us in the Discord, and we can discuss this. And also, again, feel free to share that if you like it. Share it with other people, and let them know. And please put any comments that you have about that or anything else we've discussed in the video. 𝐂𝐤𝐸𝐬, once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we will be having overtime tomorrow. Is Andrew any last words? If you were able to unmute, and if you're still here, any last words before we go?
Live long and prosper.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I could have added a few swears, I suppose. Another side, people are like, is that really you, Nick? I was like, no, that's 𝐂𝐤𝐸𝐬. I don't talk like that. But all right. were you going to say something?
No.
No, okay. All right.
I'll let my final words stand.
Oh, you let? Okay, perfect. And we will see you all tomorrow. Good night. Welcome to In Time. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. We read all of your comments, and if you like this video, please don't forget to share.